What if I shared with you that Adam actually had a companion before Eve, and that this woman's descendants are still among us in the present day? You're here watching this video because you're seeking answers about the offspring of Lilith, and I can assure you, you've come to precisely the right place. Based on ancient Hebrew writings that were intentionally excluded from the Bible, Lilith served as Adam's original partner within the Garden of Eden. However, unlike the compliant Eve who came later, Lilith rejected being subordinate to Adam and escaped from paradise to give birth to a race of entities that would permanently alter the supernatural fabric of our reality. In today's exploration, we're going deep into the forbidden historical records to reveal the complete narrative surrounding Lilith's descendants. From the succubi and incubi that invade our dreams to the demonic forces that control the underworld. Before we get started, if this is your first time on this channel, consider pressing that like button and subscribing if you haven't done so yet, but only if you truly appreciate the content I create here. Thank you so much for being here with me today. As I always say, I would really love to hear from you. Please take a moment to introduce yourself. Let everyone know your location and what time it is, where you are. It truly helps us feel like the worldwide community that we genuinely are. So, with no more delay, let's get into it, shall we? The original Eve. Far before the narratives we're familiar with, there existed another name spoken in whispers through the shadows. Lilith, not a biblical figure in the traditional sense most people envision. She shows up in just one verse, receiving barely any mention. And yet, her story expanded into something vast and terrifying across centuries of retelling. The account reaches us through a medieval Jewish manuscript known as the Alphabet of Ben Sira, composed somewhere between the 8th and 10th centuries. Within this text, Lilith appears as Adam's original companion, formed from the identical earth that he was. Not from his rib, not as some kind of afterthought. She stood alongside him as his equal. The conflict started right there in Eden. When Adam had expectations that she would lie beneath him, Lilith refused outright. Why on earth should she submit when they had been created in the same manner, from the same dust? The disagreement intensified. Adam simply could not accept her defiance. She absolutely would not accept his attempt at dominance. Then Lilith committed an act that was forbidden. She uttered the explicit name of God, the true name that contained power over creation itself. With that sacred word upon her lips, she lifted into the air and flew away from Eden, away from Adam, away from the garden and all of its restrictions. God dispatched 3 angels to pursue her. Senoi, Sansenoi, and Semanyelof followed her all the way to the Red Sea, where she had established her dwelling among the desert winds. They located her in that place and presented their ultimatum: return to Adam, or face severe punishment. 100 of her children would die each day if she continued to refuse. Lilith gazed at the angels and made her decision. She would not be returning. Let her children perish. She would stay free, dwelling in untamed places, giving birth to demons, and visiting human dwellings in the darkness to steal their infants as revenge for the children she herself had lost. This becomes both her eternal curse and her power. Cast out from paradise, transformed from woman into demon, she now haunts the edges of human civilization, mother of monsters, queen of the night, the first one to say no. But this medieval narrative didn't just appear out of nowhere. The authors of the Alphabet of Ben Sira pulled from older, darker sources. They wove together ancient terrors that had existed in human imagination for thousands of years before Judaism even existed. Lilith's character carries echoes of demons that terrified the earliest city dwellers, the first farmers. the first mothers, watching over their sleeping children. She represents something primal. The medieval Jewish scholars who gave final form to her story were providing shape to anxieties that predated their religion: fear of death during childbirth, fear surrounding infant mortality, fear of desire that couldn't be tamed, fear of women who refused to submit to the order that men had constructed. By making Lilith into Adam's first wife, they created an origin story for all of these fears. They gave ancient terrors both a name and a narrative structure. They provided explanations for why babies would sometimes stop breathing during the night, why women would sometimes reject their expected roles, why men would sometimes wake up gasping from dreams they couldn't fully remember. The brilliance of this myth lies in how simple it is. One moment of refusal, one word containing power, one flight into freedom. These three actions transform a woman into the eternal enemy of domestic order. Lilith becomes the embodiment of everything that threatens the family, is the home, the carefully maintained boundaries separating civilization from chaos. Her daughters would carry forward this legacy. Each one born from her womb out in the desert wastes would carry her spirit of rebellion. Each would prey upon human vulnerability during the dark hours. Each would serve as a reminder to mortals that the forces they feared most were also somehow recognizably human, or at least had been human at one time. The story of Lilith's daughters starts right here, with their mother's choice. Her refusal to submit becomes the pattern for thousands of demons yet to emerge. Her flight from Eden opens the doorway through which all of her children will eventually pass, moving between the human world and the realm of spirits, never quite belonging fully to either. Ancient echoes. Lilith's pre-Judaism origins. The name Lilith stretches back beyond Jewish texts into the deep past of Mesopotamian civilization. 3,000 years before the alphabet of Ben Sira, the people living between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers already lived in fear of demons with similar names and characteristics. The Lilitu were wind spirits in Sumerian belief. They traveled through the night air, invisible and dangerous. Three types existed within their taxonomy of terrors: the Lilitu proper, a female demon; the Ardat Lilitu, a maiden spirit who had perished before marriage and now preyed on men; and the Irdu Lili, her male counterpart, who tormented women. These beings shared certain characteristics that would later come to define Lilith herself. They were connected with wind, storm, and desolate places. They were hunters of the night. They targeted humans during vulnerable moments, especially during sleep. They posed particular danger to pregnant women, new mothers, and infants. Sumerian incantation texts from the 3rd millennium before the Common Era mentioned these demons over and over again. Clay tablets, inscribed in cuneiform form, preserve the exact words spoken to ward them away. Rituals designed to protect homes from their intrusion. Evidence that people genuinely lived in fear of these entities and took material action against them. But there was another figure, more terrible than the Lilitu. Lamashtu, daughter of the sky god Anu, was the most feared child-killing demon in Babylonian and Assyrian belief. Unlike other demons who were simply malevolent spirits, Lamashtu had been a goddess who was cast down, or who descended by her own choice to torment humanity. She appears in amulets and texts with 7 names, each one representing a different aspect of her nature. She rides a donkey through the underworld. She nurses a dog and a pig at her breasts. She holds snakes in her hands. Her appearance alone speaks of inverted motherhood, nurturing the wrong things, corrupted fertility. Lamashtu's primary target was pregnant women and newborns. She would enter homes during the night and steal infants from their cradles. She would cause miscarriages. She would infect mothers with fever. She would dry up breast milk. Every danger facing mothers and babies in the ancient world, found personification in her form. The people of these ancient lands created elaborate defenses. Bronze and clay amulets depicting Lamashtu's image, meant to frighten her away by showing her own face. Incantations written on door lintels, rituals performed at childbirth, special knots tied in red thread. All of these practices emerged from genuine terror of infant mortality, which claimed perhaps half of all children born. When we examine Lilith's later characteristics, we find Lamashtu's shadow everywhere: the child, stealing, the nighttime intrusions, the special danger to pregnant women, or the association with fever and disease. Even the detail that protection required specific rituals and amulets. These elements didn't originate in Jewish folklore. They were inherited from Babylonian tradition. The Mesopotamians also knew the Adat Lilitu more intimately through their texts. She was a young woman who died before she could marry and bear children. Her unfulfilled desire transformed her into a demon. She would seduce men in their sleep, stealing their vitality. She embodied frustrated sexuality turned predatory. This concept of the seductive night spirit appears across ancient Near Eastern cultures. Egypt had similar beliefs. The Canaanites knew such demons. The idea that dead women with unfulfilled desires became dangerous spirits was widespread. Jewish communities lived among these cultures. During the Babylonian exile in the 6th century before the Common Era, Jewish scholars were immersed in Mesopotamian learning. They encountered these demons in the stories of their neighbors. They saw the amulets hanging in homes. They learned the incantations. When they eventually developed their own demonology, they naturally absorbed these ancient figures. The name Lilith likely derives directly from the Lilitu. Her child-stealing nature comes from Lamashtu. Her seductive aspect echoes the Adat Lilitu. The Jewish demon is a synthesis of older fears, reshaped to fit a new religious context. Archaeological evidence supports this transmission. Incantation bowls found across Mesopotamia and the Levant, dating from roughly the 3rd to 7th centuries of the Common Era, name Lilith alongside other demons from both Jewish and Babylonian tradition. The magical formulas mix languages and religious symbols freely. Protection against Lilith often invoked both Jewish angels and Babylonian magical words. This reveals something crucial about how Lilith became who she is. She wasn't invented whole cloth by Jewish mystics. She evolved. Her character accumulated layers across millennia. Each culture that feared night demons and infant death added their own details to her legend. By the time medieval Jewish texts codified her story, she carried the weight of 3,000 years of accumulated terror, the Isaiah reference, a single biblical verse. In the entire Hebrew Bible, Lilith appears by name exactly one time. The reference comes in Isaiah chapter 34, verse 14, nestled within a prophecy of destruction and desolation. The passage describes what will inhabit the land after God's judgment falls. The verse in Hebrew mentions several creatures that will dwell in the wasteland, wild beasts, howling creatures, the satyr, and one being called Lilith. In most English translations, the word becomes night creature or screech owl, or sometimes night demon. Translators have struggled for centuries to decide what the prophet actually meant. The Hebrew word is Lilith. It appears nowhere else in the biblical text. This singularity makes interpretation difficult. Without other occurrences to provide context, scholars must guess at the meaning from the root word and from what surrounds it. The root lail means night, something of the night, a night thing. In a passage describing desolate ruins where only wild animals dwell, this could simply mean a nocturnal bird. The screech owl, with its eerie cries in darkness, would fit the atmosphere of abandonment. Yet the word's uniqueness suggests something more specific than just owl. Why use an unusual term for a common bird? Why not use the standard Hebrew words for owl that appear elsewhere in Scripture? The choice of this particular word hints that the author meant something distinctive. Context matters here. Isaiah 34 describes Edom after God's vengeance. The land becomes uninhabitable. Thorns overgrow the palaces. Wild animals make dens in the ruins. The passage lists various creatures: the desert owl, the raven, the jackal. Among these animals, Lilith is named. Whether beast or demon, she belongs to wild places. She inhabits ruins. She dwells where humans once lived, but can live no longer. This association with abandoned spaces, with the desert, with desolation, would become central to her later mythology. Early Jewish interpreters didn't see her as just an owl. The Targum, an Aramaic translation and interpretation of the Hebrew Bible made in the early centuries of the Common Era, renders the word as a demon. The ancient translators understood Lilith as a supernatural being, not merely a bird. The Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible made in the 3rd century before the Common Era, translates the word as Lamia, a Greek demon that ate children. The translators chose to match the Hebrew demon word with a Greek demon word, suggesting they knew what they were dealing with. Saint Jerome, translating the Bible into Latin in the 4th century, chose Lamia as well. He recognized the reference as demonic. His Vulgate translation cemented this interpretation for medieval Christianity. Lilith wasn't an owl. She was a mishta from Jewish folklore that Latin readers would understand through comparison to their own myth of the child-eating Lamia. This single verse became the scriptural foundation for everything that followed. Jewish mystics and folklorists could point to Isaiah and say, "See, Scripture itself mentions her. The Bible acknowledges her existence. She's not merely a folk belief or a borrowed pagan demon. She has textual legitimacy." The verse gave Lilith a foothold in sacred literature. Without it, she might have remained a figure of folk tradition alone, told in stories but lacking religious authority. With it, scholars could build elaborate theories about her nature, confident they were exploring something the prophets themselves had recognized. Later interpreters read enormous meaning into this tiny textual seed. They asked, why does Isaiah mention her specifically? What does it mean that she dwells in ruins? Why is she associated with wild beasts? Each question generated new layers of mythology. Some suggested she was there because she had always lived in deserts since her flight from Eden. The ruins Isaiah describes became her natural habitat, places that had fallen away from God's order. She represented the chaos that fills the void when civilization collapses. Others focused on her presence among animals. If she dwells with beasts, perhaps she has animal qualities herself, or perhaps she rules over them. Medieval texts sometimes depicted her with animal features: wings, talons, lion's paws. The verse seemed to authorize these hybrid forms. The passage's apocalyptic tone also mattered. Lilith appears in a vision of judgment. She belongs to the end of things, to the death of nations, to God's wrath, made manifest in empty cities. This eschatological association gave her a cosmic significance. She wasn't just a demon who bothered individuals. She was part of the machinery of divine punishment itself. Still, the verse remains brief and ambiguous. Everything built upon it comes from interpretation, not from the text itself. Isaiah gives us only a name and a setting. The elaborate mythology of Lilith and her demonic children emerges from centuries of reading meaning into this sparse mention, the consort of Samael. Lilith in Jewish mysticism. In the Zohar, the foundational text of Jewish mysticism, written in 13th century Spain but attributed to much earlier sources, Lilith undergoes a transformation. She's no longer just a demon who preys on children. She becomes a cosmic force, a dark queen with a realm of her own. The Kabbalists who wrote and studied the Zohar saw the universe in terms of paired opposites, light and dark, male and female, sacred and profane. For every holy thing, there existed an unholy mirror. For every force of creation, a force of destruction. God's union with the Shekinah, the divine feminine presence, represented the holy marriage that sustained creation. The Shekinah was God's bride, the sacred feminine aspect of divinity itself. Their cosmic union generated blessing and life. But if holiness had its sacred marriage, so must the realm of evil. The forces of darkness needed their own queen and king, their own twisted version of divine union. This is where Lilith found her new role. Samael was the great demon prince, often identified with Satan himself. He ruled the left side of the cosmic tree, the side of severity and judgment taken to evil extremes. He was the accuser, the adversary, the angel of death. His name meant poison of God. The Zohar presents Lilith as Samael's eternal consort. Together, they form the demonic counterpart to God and the Shekinah. While the holy union creates and sustains, the unholy union corrupts and destroys. Where divine marriage brings forth life, the demonic marriage spawns demons. This elevation changes everything about Lilith's nature. She's no longer a lone monster lurking in deserts. She becomes a queen with a realm, a consort with cosmic significance, a power that balances against holiness itself. Her children are no longer just troublesome spirits. They are the offspring of dark royalty. The Zohar describes how Lilith and Samael seek to corrupt the world. They work to separate the holy from each other, to break apart marriages, to introduce discord and death. When a man sleeps alone, Lilith comes to him in the night. When a woman is unguarded, Samael approaches her. They seek to steal human vitality and create more demons. According to Kabbalistic teaching, every time a man spills seed wastefully, through nocturnal emission, through solitary pleasure, through any release not aimed at procreation within marriage, Lilith appears. She collects that seed and uses it to birth more demons. These are her children, spawned from stolen human potential. This belief had enormous practical implications. Men were taught to guard themselves carefully. Wet dreams became demonic encounters. The natural functions of the body became opportunities for evil to multiply. Lilith waited for any moment of vulnerability, any lapse in spiritual defense. The Zohar also describes Lilith's appearance. She takes many forms, all beautiful, all deadly. Sometimes she appears as a young bride, radiant and desirable. Sometimes as a crone, bent and horrible. Sometimes she has wings like an owl, connecting back to the Isaiah reference. Sometimes she appears as flames or as wind, recalling her Mesopotamian origins. Her beauty is her weapon. Men who see her true form die instantly from the sight. So she hides herself in attractive shapes. She seduces through illusion. The woman who appears at the window beckoning. The dream lover who seems so real. The flash of desire that comes unbidden in the night. All these might be Lilith, stealing what she needs to continue her endless birthing of demons. Samael and Lilith's union produces not just individual demons, but entire hierarchies of evil spirits. Their court mirrors the heavenly court in structure, but inverted. Where angels serve God, demons serve Samael. Where the Shekinah nurtures creation, Lilith Mother's destruction. Some Kabbalistic texts describe their castle, a palace of mirrors and shadows where demons feast and plot. Others locate their dwelling at the bottom of the cosmic tree, in the realm called the Qliphoth, the shells or husks of creation, the waste products of the divine emanation. There they rule over all that went wrong in the formation of the universe. The mystical texts also explore when this union began. Some say Lilith became Samael's bride immediately after leaving Eden. Others claim she had many consorts first, the demon Asmodeus and others, before finally accepting Samael as her eternal partner. Still others suggest their union existed before creation, a possibility so disturbing that most teachers rejected it. What matters most is the theological function this pairing serves. By making Lilith a queen rather than a random monster, the Kabbalists explained the organized nature of evil. Demons weren't chaotic. They had structure, hierarchy, purpose. Lilith wasn't just targeting babies randomly. She was waging cosmic war against the forces of holiness, trying to multiply her own kind at the expense of humanity. This framework also provided tools for resistance. If Lilith and Samael were cosmic powers, then cosmic powers could oppose them. Angels could be invoked. Divine names could create barriers. The sacred marriage of husband and wife, properly maintained, could ward off the demonic marriage's influence. Mother of demons, the birth of the Lilin. After Lilith fled Eden and rejected the angel's ultimatum, she didn't remain alone in the desert. The texts tell us she began to procreate, birthing vast numbers of demon children. These offspring became known as the Lilin, or sometimes the Liliote, when specifically referring to her daughters. The alphabet of Ben Sira states that Lilith births 100 children each day. This matches the angel's curse. 100 of her children will perish daily if she refuses to return to Adam. So each day she loses 100, and each day she creates 100 more, an endless cycle of birth and loss, generation and destruction. This perpetual birthing serves several narrative functions. First, it explains why demons seem infinite. No matter how many exorcisms occur, no matter how many protective spells are cast, there are always more demons. Lilith's womb continuously replenishes their numbers. Second, it links demon activity to Lilith's revenge. She lost her own children because she refused submission. Now she takes human children in return. Her grief becomes her weapon. Her loss becomes humanity's loss. The curse transforms her into an engine of retribution. The question arises, who fathers these countless demons? Different texts provide different answers. Some say she lies with male demons, various consorts who rule different aspects of the demonic realm. Asmodeus appears in several accounts as one of her partners. So does Samael, as we've discussed. Others name demons like Agrat Bat Mahat, though accounts differ on his identity. Other traditions describe something more disturbing. Lilith gathers the seed of mortal men while they sleep, nocturnal emissions, minus solitary pleasures, even marital relations not properly blessed. All these provide material for her to harvest. She takes what is spilled wastefully and uses it to create demons. This belief held real power over medieval Jewish communities. Men were taught that every drop of seed carried the potential for a human soul. Wasted seed meant potential children denied life. But worse, Lilith would take that wasted potential and twist it, creating demon children instead of human ones. The Lilin inherit traits from their mother. They are nocturnal beings, most powerful in darkness. They can fly or move invisibly. They can assume pleasing shapes to deceive humans. They hunger for human vitality in various forms: blood, breath, sexual energy. the life force of infants. Male and female. Lilin differ in their typical behaviors, though overlap exists. Male demons, the incubi, tend to visit women. Female demons, the succubi, target men. But both types can shapeshift, and both can appear in dreams or during waking darkness. The Lilin are not mindless monsters. Medieval texts describe them as cunning, capable of speech, able to make bargains. They understand human nature well, having been born from the union of demonic and human elements. This makes them more dangerous than simple beasts. They can plan, deceive, and adapt their methods to each victim. Jewish folklore developed elaborate classifications for different types of Lilin. Some specialized in causing nightmares. Others brought disease. Some stole newborns from cradles. Others caused discord between married couples. The demon world had specialization. Different children with different roles in tormenting humanity. Protective measures targeted Lilith's children as much as Lilith herself. Amulets often specified protection against both the mother and her offspring. Incantations would list multiple demons by name, trying to cover all possibilities. New mothers were surrounded by guards for the first weeks after birth, because the Lilin particularly targeted the vulnerable window before a child's naming ceremony. The concept of the Lilin explains the diversity of demonic encounters. If people experience different types of spiritual attacks, that's because different demon children had different natures and methods. The woman who died in childbirth, the man who woke gasping from nightmares, the infant found lifeless in the morning. Each fell victim to a different one of Lilith's offspring. This also provided a mythology for generational trauma. Lilith's curse perpetuates across time. Her children's children continue the war she began. The conflict between humanity and demons becomes an eternal struggle, renewed in each generation. Parents protect their children from the same dangers their parents warned them about. The Lilin represent more than just evil spirits. They embody the dark mirror of family and legacy. Where human parents hope their children will surpass them and build better lives, Lilith's children exist only to continue her revenge. Where human families represent hope and continuity, demon families represent endless cycles of harm. Medieval Jews, living with high infant mortality, with mysterious illnesses that struck without warning, with the intimate terrors of darkness and dreams, found in the Lilin an explanation for their suffering. These weren't random tragedies. They were the work of specific entities, driven by specific motivations, and therefore potentially defensible through specific actions. The sons of Lilith, the incubi, pestilence demons. Lilith's male offspring occupy a particular niche in demonology. While her daughters gain names and distinct personalities, her sons appear more often as a collective force. They are the incubi, the disease bringers, the spirits of nocturnal assault. The incubus, in medieval understanding, was a demon who lay upon sleeping women. The weight on the chest during sleep paralysis, the sensation of being held down, the terrifying inability to move or cry out. These experiences were attributed to incubi. The name itself comes from Latin, meaning to lie upon. Jewish texts describe these male demons as seeking human women, for the same reason Lilith sought human men to create more demons. When an incubus visited a woman, he might appear in dreams as her husband or as a stranger. The encounter would seem real, vivid, sometimes pleasant, and sometimes terrifying. Mourning brought confusion and shame. Women who experienced such dreams often remained silent, fearing accusations of infidelity or madness. But the tradition held that these weren't fantasies. They were actual demonic intrusions, violations by spirits who could penetrate the boundary between sleep and waking. Children born from such unions posed theological problems. Were they fully human, partly demonic? Some texts suggested that children conceived through incubus visits bore subtle marks. They might be unusually intelligent or beautiful, or they might bring misfortune to their families. Medieval communities sometimes blamed unexplained traits or behaviors on possible demonic ancestry. Beyond sexual assault, Lilith's sons specialized in bringing disease. Pestilence demons were understood as actual entities that caused illness by their presence. Fever wasn't just a symptom. It was an invading demon that needed expelling. Different sons carried different sicknesses. Some brought plague, others brought wasting diseases. Some specialized in fevers that came at night and lifted by morning. Others caused the coughing sickness that killed children. Each disease had its demon, and many of these demons were counted among Lilith's male offspring. Mesopotamian roots show clearly in this aspect of the tradition. The ancient world understood disease as demonic. Medicine and exorcism were intertwined. Healing required both physical remedies and spiritual defenses. Jewish demon law inherited this framework and adapted it. The sons of Lilith also appear in texts about possession. While Lilith herself might torment from outside, entering homes and cradles, her male children could enter human bodies. They would speak through the victim's mouth, using the person's voice. Exorcism rituals developed specifically for driving out these possessing spirits. Compared to the named daughters, these sons remain largely anonymous. We don't have elaborate myths about individual male demons the way we do about Agrat Bat, Mahlat, or Nama. The sons function as a category, a type, a collective threat. They are numerous and mostly interchangeable. This difference might reflect cultural attitudes about gender and danger. Female demons threatened through seduction and child stealing. Very specific fears centered on women's roles. Male demons threatened through force and disease, more generalized violence. Female demons were individualized because the fears they represented were more complex. Male demons could remain anonymous because brute harm needed less explanation. Still, some male demons from the broader tradition were sometimes identified as Lilith's sons. Asmodeus, the demon of wrath and lust from the Book of Tobit, appears in some texts as either her consort or her son. Sources vary. He brings discord to marriages, preventing consummation or causing fights between spouses. Other named male demons include those who cause specific afflictions. The demon of quartan fever, who brought attacks every fourth day. The demon of consumption, who slowly wasted the body. The demon of madness, who stole reason. Jewish magical texts name and bind these individual spirits, trying to protect against their specific harms. Incubi had particular association with monasteries and unmarried women. Christian demonology especially emphasized this danger. Nuns and virgin women were considered prime targets, perhaps because their celibacy was seen as unnatural by demon standards, a violation of nature that demons sought to correct through assault. Jewish tradition worried more about married women being visited when their husbands traveled. Months of separation left women vulnerable. Men were warned to hurry home, lest demons take advantage of their wives' loneliness. The intimacy demons offered was a cruel mockery of true marriage, exploiting human need for comfort and touch. Protection against incubi and disease demons required vigilance. Prayers before sleep, specific psalms recited, amulets worn constantly, not just during pregnancy and infancy. The home itself needed regular spiritual maintenance. Mezuzot on doors, blessings spoken over thresholds, certain herbs hung in windows. Male demons also served as the foot soldiers in the cosmic war between holiness and corruption. Where Lilith and her daughters were often depicted as queens and princesses of the demonic realm, her sons formed the armies. They carried out the bulk of demonic work, the grinding daily labor of tormenting humanity. The first daughters, Agrat, Bat-Mahlat, and Naama. Among Lilith's countless daughters, two stand out in Jewish mysticism as named powerful entities with their own domains and characteristics. Agrat, Bat-Mahlat, and Naama appear repeatedly in Kabbalistic texts as queens of demons in their own right, inheriting their mother's power and extending her reach. Agrat Bat-Mahlat's name appears in Talmudic sources dating back to the early centuries of the Common Era, making her one of the oldest specifically named daughters. Her title means Agrat, daughter of Mahlat. Some interpret Mahlat as meaning disease or dissolution, marking her as born from corruption itself. The Talmud describes her commanding 18 myriads of destroying angels. She rides in a great chariot through the night sky, accompanied by her demonic hosts. Wednesday nights and Saturday nights are particularly her time, when she travels most actively. People were warned to avoid crossroads during these nights, as encountering Agrat's procession meant certain death. Abaye, a Babylonian rabbi from the 4th century, claimed to have negotiated with Agrat Bat-Mahlat. According to the Talmudic account, he restricted her travels to certain nights only, preventing her from harming people during the other nights. This negotiation suggests she could be reasoned with. Unlike mindless, destructive forces, she had intelligence, pride, and the ability to keep bargains. Later, Kabbalistic texts elaborate on her nature. She becomes one of the 4 queens of demons, ruling a quarter of the demonic realm. The Zohar places her as ruler of the western quarter, though sources vary on exact directions. She commands specifically over the demons of destruction and violence, those who bring sudden death and disaster. Agrat Bat-Mahlat is sometimes called the dancing demon, associated with wild, ecstatic movement. This connects her to older, ancient Near Eastern traditions of ritualized dance that could become possessed or frenzied. She represents the danger in abandoning control, in letting the body move without the mind's governance. Naama's origins differ. Her name first appears in Genesis chapter 4, verse 22, where she's listed as the sister of Tubal-Cain, a descendant of Cain and a metal worker. In the biblical text, she's simply mentioned without any further explanation. She's the last person listed in Cain's genealogy before the flood narrative begins. Post-biblical tradition transformed this brief mention into something elaborate. Naama became known as a demon of seduction, so beautiful that she captivated angels themselves. According to medieval sources, she was among the women whose beauty tempted the angels mentioned in Genesis chapter 6, leading to the birth of the Nephilim. Some texts identify her as the mother of demons through her unions with angels. Others make her one of the 4 wives or primary consorts of demons, alongside Lilith, Agrat Bat-Mahlat, and the demon Mahalath. In this schema, she represents a different aspect of demonic femininity than Lilith, less focused on revenge and rebellion, more purely focused on seduction. Naama specializes in appearing in men's dreams. She's the archetypal succubus, taking forms that perfectly match each man's desire. Her power lies in reading what each person finds most attractive and becoming exactly that. She doesn't just seduce through generic beauty, but through perfectly tailored temptation. The Zohar attributes specific roles to her. She seduces men to spill seed wastefully. She causes men to betray their wives in thought, if not in deed. She's responsible for nocturnal emissions and forbidden desires. Every man who wakes from an arousing dream has entertained Naama, whether he knows it or not. Unlike Agrat Bat-Mahlat, who brings violence and death, Naama's harm is more subtle. She corrupts through pleasure. She weakens spiritual discipline through desire. She doesn't destroy the body immediately, but slowly drains vitality through repeated nocturnal visits. Men visited regularly by Nama grow pale, weak, listless, their life force gradually consumed. Both daughters inherited their mother's immortality and power. They don't age, they don't tire. They've continued their work across millennia, from the ancient world into the medieval period and beyond. Each generation of humans faces the same demons their ancestors faced. The relationship between these daughters and Lilith varies by source. Some texts present them as independent queens who cooperate with their mother but run their own domains. Others suggest they serve Lilith, carrying out her will in regions she doesn't directly govern. Still others imply tension and competition between the mother and her powerful daughters. What's clear is that naming these specific daughters allowed Jewish tradition to explain different types of demonic experience. Agrat Bat Mahlat explains sudden disasters, violence, encounters with death on dark roads. Naama explains sexual dreams, forbidden desires, the slow drain of vitality. Together with Lilith, they cover the range of nocturnal fears. Protection against these daughters required specifically naming them. Amulets would list Lilith, Agrat, Bat, Mahlat, Naama, and sometimes Mahalath or other named demons. By invoking their specific names in a protective formula, one aimed to bind their particular powers. Generic protection against demons wasn't enough when facing queens with their own domains. The succubi, daughters of seduction and theft. The succubus represents perhaps the most persistent and widespread aspect of Lilith's legacy. These female demons who visit men in darkness appear in traditions from medieval Europe to ancient Persia, from Jewish mysticism to Catholic demonology. They share a common purpose: stealing male sexual essence to create more demons. The word succubus comes from Latin, meaning to lie beneath. This distinguishes them from incubi, who lie upon their victims. But the terminology obscures the actual belief. Succubi were seen as active aggressors, not passive partners. They initiated encounters, shaped dreams, and extracted what they needed. In Jewish tradition, these demons are explicitly daughters of Lilith, inheriting her methods and motivations. When Lilith visits men to collect spilled seed, her daughters do the same. They appear as beautiful women in dreams, as fleeting figures glimpsed in shadows, as sudden, overwhelming desires that come unbidden in the night. The mechanism was understood quite literally. When a man experienced arousal during sleep, demons were believed to be actively present, manipulating his dreams and body. The pleasure he felt wasn't natural, but induced by demonic influence. The emission that resulted became material for creating more demons. This belief transformed normal bodily functions into spiritual warfare. Nocturnal emissions, which we now understand as natural physiological responses, were seen as demonic attacks requiring defense. Young men reaching puberty entered a battlefield. Every night brought potential assault. Every morning might mean inadvertently fathering demons. The children born from such unions posed theological problems. Were they real beings? Some texts suggested succubi didn't carry pregnancies themselves, but instead took the stolen seed to impregnate mortal women, creating the illusion that a woman's husband had fathered the child. Others claimed demon children gestated in the spirit world, never taking physical form. Medieval Christian demonologists elaborated extensively on succubi. They debated whether demons could actually experience pleasure or merely simulated it. They discussed whether the temperature of demon bodies differed from human bodies. Most agreed demons were unnaturally cold. They analyzed whether demon encounters could result in pregnancy. Some authorities taught that demons could not create life, as creation required a soul, which only God could provide. Therefore, a succubus would visit a man as a succubus, steal his seed, then visit a woman as an incubus, and implant that seed. The resulting child would be technically human, with two human parents, but arranged by demonic intervention. This explanation conveniently addressed cases where women became pregnant under suspicious circumstances. It also explained children born with unusual traits or temperaments. If a child seemed wrong somehow, demon involvement in conception provided an answer that didn't require accusing the mother of infidelity. Succubi specialized in mimicry. They could appear as a man's wife, preventing him from realizing he wasn't lying with his actual spouse. They could take the form of someone he'd seen and desired. They could even read his mind and become his perfect fantasy. This shape-shifting made them nearly impossible to identify during the encounter itself. Recognition came afterward. Men who had been visited would experience certain symptoms: extreme fatigue, weakness, pallor, listlessness, wasting, loss of interest in their actual wives. Some men became obsessed, longing for the demon to return. The succubus's power lay partly in the addictive quality of the encounters. Protection required both physical and spiritual measures. Men were told to sleep with lights burning, to recite protective prayers before bed, to wear specific amulets, to ensure their beds were blessed. Married men were urged to remain close to their wives, as a properly sanctified marriage provided strong protection. The fear of succubi also reinforced celibacy and sexual control. Men were warned that any pleasure outside of procreative marital relations opened doors for demons. Masturbation wasn't just a sin, it was actively feeding the enemy. This teaching gave spiritual weight to sexual restrictions. Women could also be succubi in human form. According to some teachings, beautiful women who aroused desire were sometimes suspected of being demons or demon-influenced. This suspicion fell particularly on women who existed outside male control: widows, prostitutes, independent women. Their sexuality, not controlled by a husband, became demonic by association. The succubus myth also provided vocabulary for sleep paralysis and related phenomena: the sensation of a presence in the room, the inability to move, the feeling of pressure on the chest, the experience of a figure approaching the bed. All these could be explained as demonic visitation. Nocturnal panic attacks, sleep disorders, and the vivid hypnagogic hallucinations that occur during the transition between waking and sleeping found their explanation in succubi. The experiences were real enough. The interpretation assigned them to Lilith's daughters rather than to neurology. Modern psychology recognizes the succubus phenomenon as cultural interpretation of natural experiences. But for medieval communities, these weren't metaphors or explanations after the fact. They were believed to be actual entities doing actual harm. Rabbis conducted exorcisms for men who had been visited too often. Priests prescribed penances. Healers provided amulets. The succubus represents the dark side of desire itself. She embodies the fear that sexuality might be uncontrollable, that even in sleep, with defenses down, forbidden urges might emerge. She's the return of the repressed, the desires denied during waking hours that manifest in dreams. By making these desires external, by attributing them to attacking demons, the mythology provided a way to acknowledge powerful urges without taking responsibility for them: the child stealers, the demonic counterpart to motherhood. Among all the roles attributed to Lilith and her daughters, none held more terror for ancient and medieval communities than their reputation as child killers. This aspect of their mythology emerged directly from the agonizing reality of infant mortality in the pre-modern world. In ancient Mesopotamia, perhaps 40 to 50% of children did not survive their first year. Death came from infection, malnutrition, stillbirth, sudden mysterious causes we now call SIDS. Parents went to sleep beside living infants and woke to find them cold and still. No explanation, no warning, just the incomprehensible loss. Human minds demand explanations for suffering. When a baby stops breathing in the night for no visible reason, when a pregnancy ends without cause, when a healthy child suddenly sickens and fades within days, people need to understand why. Lilith provided that understanding. The mythology held that Lilith and her daughters specifically targeted newborns and pregnant women. The first 8 days of a male child's life, before his circumcision and naming ceremony, were considered especially dangerous. The child had no name yet, no full identity, making him vulnerable to demonic theft. Female infants were at risk for the first 20 days. Demons would enter homes at night and approach cradles. They might steal the child's breath. They might exchange the healthy infant for a sickly changeling. They might take the child's soul while leaving the body to die. The methods varied, but the result was the same: a dead or dying child by morning. Pregnant women faced different dangers. Lilith and her daughters could cause miscarriage by merely being present. They could twist the baby in the womb. They could dry up the mother's milk after birth. They could bring fever and infection to the birthing chamber. Each stage of pregnancy and early motherhood had its specific demonic threat. The strangling demon was particularly feared. She would sit on the chest of sleeping infants, pressing down until they couldn't breathe. Parents who found their babies blue and lifeless believed this demon had visited. We now know these deaths as SIDS, but the symptoms matched the mythology perfectly. A previously healthy infant found dead without clear cause. Some texts describe how the demons would play with stolen children in the spirit realm. The baby's cries heard at night when no baby was present became evidence of this. A mother hearing phantom infant sounds after losing a child could believe her baby still existed somewhere, trapped in demon hands. This belief created elaborate protective practices. Pregnant women wore specific amulets from the moment conception was confirmed until well after birth. The birthing chamber was surrounded with protective inscriptions. Herbs were hung. Red thread was tied around the baby's wrist. Visitors were limited. After birth, someone stayed awake watching the infant constantly for the first weeks. Mothers who could afford it hired watchers specifically for this purpose. Those who couldn't took shifts with family members. The baby was never left alone, never left unwatched. Constant vigilance was the price of a child's survival. Naming ceremonies were rushed when possible. Once a child had a name and had entered the community through ritual, the danger decreased, but didn't disappear. Demons preferred unnamed babies, but they would take named children too if the opportunity arose. Lilith's own motivation made the threat more personal. She had lost her children because of her refusal to submit. Every human child she took balanced the scales slightly. Her daughters inherited this mission. They weren't killing randomly, they were prosecuting their mother's eternal revenge against the children of Adam and Eve. Some traditions held that Lilith specifically targeted the children of women who had been rude to her or had failed to take proper precautions. A woman who didn't wear her amulet, who boasted about her easy pregnancy, who failed to perform the right rituals. These failures invited demonic attention. The mythology also addressed childless couples. If a woman couldn't conceive, demons might be blocking her womb. If she miscarried repeatedly, demons were stealing the children before birth. Infertility wasn't just bad luck or biological incompatibility. It was spiritual warfare that required spiritual solutions. Remedies included everything from herbs and potions to elaborate rituals and pilgrimages. Amulets needed regular renewal. Prayers required constant repetition. The fight to protect children and ensure successful childbirth consumed enormous energy and resources. This aspect of the myth served a psychological function beyond explanation. It gave parents something to do. Faced with the terrible helplessness of watching children sicken and die despite all care, the protective rituals provided action. Light a candle, speak the words, hang the amulet. Do something rather than sit passive before fate. The collective nature of the threat also created community bonds. Women shared protective knowledge. They passed down amulets and incantations. They sat vigil together over newborns. They comforted each other through losses by affirming that demons, not maternal failure, were responsible. In modern times, sudden infant death syndrome still strikes without warning or explanation. Parents still experience the incomprehensible horror of a healthy baby dying in sleep. We've replaced demon mythology with medical terminology, but the grief and confusion remain identical. The child-stealing demons embodied the worst fear any parent knows, that their child might be taken despite every precaution. That love isn't enough to guarantee protection. That random tragedy can shatter a family in a single night. By giving this fear a face and a name, by making it an entity that could potentially be warded off, the mythology provided some small measure of psychological control over the uncontrollable, amulets and incantations. In turn, the magical war at the bedside. If demons constantly threatened homes, children, and sleepers, then protection required constant vigilance and powerful magic. Jewish communities developed an extensive arsenal of defensive measures against Lilith and her children. These weren't mere superstitions, but serious magical technology, carefully crafted and ritually charged. Amulets represent the most visible and widespread protection. These were small objects inscribed with names, symbols, and incantations, worn on the body or hung in specific locations. They ranged from simple to elaborate, cheap to expensive, generic to custom-made. The most common form listed the names of 3 angels, Senoi, Sansenoi, and Semangelof. These were the 3 angels God sent to retrieve Lilith from the Red Sea. Though they failed to bring her back, they extracted a promise from her. She swore that whenever she saw their names, she would have no power to harm. Therefore, displaying their names functioned as a binding contract, forcing Lilith to keep her word. Other amulets used divine names and biblical verses. Psalm 91, which speaks of protection from night terrors, appeared frequently. The Shema, the central declaration of Jewish faith, provided powerful defense. Divine names written in specific patterns created protective barriers. Red threads served as cheap, accessible protection. A red thread wrapped around the wrist of a newborn baby or draped on the body of an expecting mother was believed to hold protective strength. Red as a color was understood to possess apotropaic qualities, meaning it had the power to repel evil forces. Certain sources link this belief to the symbolism of blood, representing the essence of life that demonic entities couldn't easily conquer. Another significant category of protective measures involved bowls carved with magical incantations. These incantation bowls, discovered throughout Mesopotamian regions and the Levant, originated from the 3rd through 7th centuries of the Common Era. Archaeologists have unearthed thousands upon thousands of these vessels, offering tangible proof of just how widespread such beliefs truly were. The interior surfaces of these bowls were inscribed with text that spiraled inward, most commonly written in Aramaic or Hebrew, though sometimes blending multiple languages together. The inscribed text would identify the individual or household receiving protection, enumerate the demons being kept at bay, call upon angels and sacred names, and order the demons to depart. After the inscription was complete, the bowl would be positioned upside down beneath doorways, tucked into the corners of living spaces, or concealed underground at the edges of property lines. Certain incantation bowls addressed Lilith by name, commanding her departure and forbidding her return. Additional bowls listed her offspring alongside her presence. These formulas frequently incorporated threatening language. Should the demon refuse to leave, even more powerful forces would be called forth to restrain or annihilate her. The texts established a hierarchy of spiritual authority, placing the demon at the very bottom. A frequently used formula proclaimed, "You are restrained by the Lord's angels, marked by Solomon's seal, denied entrance by the names inscribed here." This invocation drew upon multiple wellsprings of authority: the power of angels, the mythical magic attributed to King Solomon, and the strength of the divine names themselves when written down. Domestic spaces demanded consistent spiritual upkeep. Upon moving into a dwelling, protective inscriptions would be positioned on door frames. Mezuzahs, which are small containers holding parchment inscribed with scriptural passages, were attached to doorposts. Window frames might have protective symbols carved directly into them. The home transformed into a fortress, with every possible entry point protected. Birthing chambers received particularly special attention. Prior to the onset of labor, the room would be prepared with amulets suspended from all four walls, protective verses written on paper and positioned beneath the mattress, and particular herbs distributed across the floor. Some customs included drawing a circle surrounding the bed using chalk or salt, establishing a boundary that demons were unable to cross. Following the birth, both mother and infant remained within this safeguarded space throughout the perilous initial week. Visitors faced restrictions and screening. Anyone entering was required to perform ritual cleansing and speak protective phrases. The objective was minimizing every possible opportunity for demons to penetrate the defenses. Men who feared nocturnal emissions and attacks from succubi employed different protective measures. Amulets worn throughout sleep, prayers spoken before retiring to bed, avoiding sleep in chambers containing mirrors, since demons were thought to traverse through reflective surfaces. Particularly anxious men would remain wakeful all night, studying sacred texts, using continuous engagement with holy words as their defensive strategy. The protective formulas frequently included conditional phrasing. Should you approach this dwelling? Should you enter this chamber? Should you touch this infant? Followed by progressively harsher consequences. This established a deterrent mechanism, warning demons that penetrating the defenses would result in punishment. Certain amulets functioned proactively instead of defensively. Rather than merely driving Lilith away, they commanded her to undertake protective responsibilities. Specific texts compelled her to safeguard children instead of harming them, binding her power for beneficial purposes. This reversal of her fundamental nature was regarded as exceptionally potent magic, since it turned her own force against demonic threats originating from other sources. The effectiveness of these protective measures was continuously validated through selective memory. Whenever a child wearing an amulet survived, the amulet had proven successful. Whenever a child lacking an amulet perished, the absence of protection received the blame. Failures of protection, when a child wearing an amulet still died, were rationalized by improper ritual execution, a corrupted amulet, or an especially powerful demonic assault requiring even stronger countermeasures. This generated a self-perpetuating system. Tragedy reinforced belief in demonic forces, Belief in demons necessitated protective measures. Protections occasionally correlated with survival, and survival validated that demons were real and protections functioned properly. The cycle perpetuated itself across generations. The archaeological record validates how seriously these beliefs were maintained. Thousands and thousands of amulets and bowls have survived to the present day. Wealthy households commissioned intricate silver amulets, while poor families made do with paper inscribed with identical formulas. Everyone, irrespective of social standing, participated in this magical warfare against Lilith and her offspring. Modern perspectives might view these as quaint folk customs, but they represented genuine fear and authentic hope. Parents burying incantation bowls beneath their dwellings believed they were taking tangible action to safeguard their children. Women wearing amulets throughout pregnancy believed they were fighting for their baby's survival. The magic held the same reality as medicine and often proved more accessible and affordable. The Scarlet Woman, Lilith within Christian demonology. The early church fathers encountered a challenge. Jewish texts referenced demons they needed to acknowledge, yet these beings possessed no clear position within Christian scripture. Lilith existed in the periphery of Hebrew tradition, never entirely biblical, never entirely dismissed. The resolution arrived through absorption and transformation. She entered Christian thought stripped of her name. Church scholars re-examined Genesis with fresh eyes and perceived her shadow present everywhere. The serpent who tempted Eve became suspect. Why had this creature spoken with such intelligence? Why had it selected the woman first? Certain theologians proposed that the serpent itself was female or possessed by a female demon. The identification appeared natural. A woman who rejected God's ordained order, who introduced corruption into paradise. This aligned with what they understood of the first wife legend. By the medieval period, this connection had solidified within popular imagination. Artistic representations began depicting the Eden serpent with a woman's face and upper body. The Sistine Chapel preserves this tradition. Michelangelo's serpent, coiled upon the tree, displays distinctly feminine features. The symbolism penetrated deeply. Woman as temptress, woman as the voice of disobedience, woman as the gateway to sin. However, the Church required more than symbolic connections. It needed practical demonology to explain the world's evils. The succubus tradition provided precisely that framework. These nocturnal demons who visited sleeping men had been documented since the era of the Roman incubi. Christian scholars inherited these accounts and needed to explain their origins. The daughters of Lilith, already established within Jewish folklore as seductresses and night demons, fit perfectly into this classification. The theological mechanics became remarkably specific. Augustine and subsequent scholars debated whether demons could truly reproduce. The consensus emerged that they couldn't create life, but they could steal and manipulate it. A succubus would visit a man during the night, collecting his seed. That same demon, transforming into an incubus, would then visit a woman and deliver what it had stolen. The resulting children were human, but corrupted, touched by demonic influence from the moment of conception. This framework explained much that troubled medieval society. Why did certain children seem wrong from birth? Why did particular bloodlines produce witches and heretics? Why did some women possess unnatural beauty that drove men toward sin? The answer resided in ancient contamination, a demonic lineage extending back to Eden's first rebellion. The Book of Revelation provided another critical link. John's vision described a great harlot dressed in scarlet, drunk on the blood of saints, the mother of all abominations upon earth. Medieval commentators perceived in this whore of Babylon an echo of the first rebel woman. Certain texts made the connection explicit, describing how the Queen of Demons would manifest at the end times, gathering her daughters for final war against the faithful. Witch trial records reveal how these ideas shaped prosecution. Accused women faced specific questions about their demonic lovers. Had a spirit visited them during the night? Had they borne children who died in infancy? Had they experienced strange compulsions or desires that seemed foreign to their nature? These questions assumed a cosmology where Lilith's daughters walked among humanity, recruiting new members to their sisterhood. The transformation of witches into demons became nearly complete in certain theological texts. A witch wasn't simply a human who made a pact with Satan. She was, in essence, adopting the role of Lilith's daughter, rejecting Christian order, embracing forbidden knowledge, using her sexuality as a weapon, and threatening the innocent. The stereotype crystallized: the beautiful witch who seduced men, the hag who cursed children, the midwife whose patients suffered mysterious deaths. Geography played a significant role in these beliefs. Just as Jewish texts positioned Lilith in the desert, Christian tradition frequently located her daughters at civilization's edges. Mountain peaks where few ventured, deep forests, crossroads at midnight. These liminal spaces belonged to them, neither fully within the human world nor entirely separate from it. The Virgin Mary emerged as the explicit opposite of this demonic feminine. Where Lilith rejected her husband, Mary accepted God's will. Where Lilith refused to birth human children, Mary bore the Savior. Where Lilith's daughters stole children and corrupted bloodlines, Mary protected the innocent and interceded for humanity. The cult of Mary grew partially in response to these fears, offering a sanctified feminine to counter the demonic one. Yet even as the Church condemned these legends, it preserved them. Monastic libraries copied the texts. Theologians debated the fine points of demonic reproduction, and artists painted the serpent woman with disturbing beauty. The myth survived because it served a purpose, explaining the presence of evil in a world supposedly redeemed by Christ's sacrifice. By the height of the medieval period, Lilith herself might not have been named in every sermon, but her daughters were everywhere. They haunted the margins of manuscripts, lurked in cautionary tales told to children, and manifested in the fevered confessions extracted from accused witches. The Church had made them real through belief, and that reality would not easily fade. The Queen of Zamargad, the geography of a demon realm. Demons required a home. They couldn't simply float through the void without origin or destination. Human imagination demanded a place for them, a geography that made their existence tangible. Jewish and Christian tradition provided that landscape, though its exact location shifted with each telling. The desert held primary claim. Isaiah's reference positioned Lilith among the ruins of Edom, in wastelands where no human dwelt. This made intuitive sense to ancient peoples. Deserts were spaces of death and testing, where prophets wandered and demons whispered. The howling winds sounded like voices. The heat caused visions. Travelers who ventured too far sometimes returned, changed, or didn't return at all. But beyond mere desert, certain texts described a specific realm. The Testament of Solomon, a Greek text from the first centuries of the Common Era, catalogued demons with unusual precision. It named their dwellings and their territories. Here we find references to Zamargad, a city or region associated with demonic queens. Though the text doesn't explicitly place Lilith there, later traditions made the connection. She required a palace, a kingdom, to match her status. Zamargad itself remains mysterious. Some scholars link the name to the Hebrew word for emerald, suggesting a green land contrary to the desert image. Others see it as a corruption of Samaria or another ancient place name. The text provides few details, but medieval interpreters filled the gaps. They imagined high walls of black stone, towers reaching toward a moonless sky, gardens where poisonous flowers bloomed and bore fruit that drove mortals mad. The Zohar expanded this cosmology considerably. Kabbalistic texts describe not one demon realm, but multiple layers, a shadow mirror of the divine emanations. At the lowest level, closest to the material world, Lilith reigned with Samael. Their domain was called the Other Side, the Sitra Akra, a place of broken shards and inverted holiness. This was where the daughters gathered, where the Lilin bred and planned their incursions into the human world. Access to this realm came through specific gates. Some texts describe these as literal locations, certain caves, particular ruins, crossroads where the veil grew thin. Others treated them as spiritual thresholds that opened during specific times. The new moon, when darkness was complete, the hour between midnight and dawn, the liminal moments when one day died and another had not quite begun. European folklore added its own features to this demon geography. The Wild Hunt, a procession of spirits that rode through the night sky, became associated with Lilith's host in some regions. They were said to fly from their hidden realm to sweep across human lands, stealing away the unwary. Mountain peaks served as gathering points. The Brocken in the Harz Mountains, site of the legendary Walpurgisnacht celebrations, was one such place where the border thinned. Water marked another type of boundary. Rivers, in Jewish tradition, could block demons who couldn't cross running water. This belief appears in protective rituals, pouring water in a circle, placing a bowl of water beneath a birthing bed. Yet, certain bodies of water belong to the demons themselves. The Red Sea, the Dead Sea, mysterious lakes in distant lands where nothing lived. These were said to be gateways or gathering places. The cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, destroyed by divine fire, became another location for demon dwelling in post-biblical tradition. The smoking ruins, the Dead Sea's toxic shores, the salt formations that resembled human figures, all of this suggested a realm where Lilith's daughters might walk freely. Some legends claimed that Lilith herself had advised the women of Sodom in their corruption, teaching them practices that led to the city's destruction. Persian and Mesopotamian influence added the concept of the hanging gardens, though inverted. Instead of the beautiful terraced gardens of Babylon, demon queens ruled over hanging gardens of thorns, where plants grew downward into darkness rather than upward toward light. These impossible spaces existed in the cracks between worlds, accessible only through ritual or accident. Medieval Jewish mysticism developed elaborate maps of these demon territories. Travelers' tales mixed with theological speculation to produce detailed accounts. Some claimed that Lilith ruled a mobile court, never staying in one place long. Others insisted her palace stood in a fixed location, but couldn't be reached by normal means. One might walk for years and never find it, or stumble upon it by accident in a single night. The daughters each had their own domains within this larger territory. Agrat Bat Mahalet was said to command a host that roamed specific routes through the night sky. Nama held court in locations associated with water and mirrors. Lesser daughters controlled smaller territories, a particular forest, a stretch of coast, a series of caves. They were feudal lords in a dark kingdom, answering to their mother but maintaining their own realms. Physical descriptions varied, but shared common elements. Buildings made of materials that shouldn't hold shape, smoke given form, moonlight solidified, shadows that bore weight, trees that grew without sunlight, bearing fruit that sustained demons but would poison mortals, rivers that flowed with liquids that were not water, sounds that came from no visible source, music that could entrance those who heard it. This geography served practical purposes in folk belief. If demons lived somewhere specific, they could be contained there. Rituals and prayers sought to keep them within their boundaries, to strengthen the walls between their realm and ours. Conversely, certain actions might tear those walls down, might open gates that should remain closed. Magic practiced incorrectly, names spoken in the wrong places, invitations extended without understanding. The landscape of the demon realm reflected and inverted the holy geography familiar to believers. Jerusalem, the city of God, had its opposite in Zamargad, or the cities of the plain. The rivers of Eden that brought life found their shadow in rivers that brought corruption. The sacred mountains where prophets received revelation became peaks where demons gathered. Every holy place required a profane counterpart to maintain cosmic balance. Modern readers might dismiss this as pure fantasy, but it functioned as real geography for those who believed. Maps sometimes marked these locations. Travelers avoided certain routes at certain times. The demon realm was as concrete as Rome or Babylon, simply harder to reach and infinitely more dangerous. It existed on earth, but not quite of it. Accessible, but forbidden. Near, but remote. The night hag and mare. The folkloric evolution in Europe. The demons crossed borders more easily than humans. As Jewish communities dispersed across Europe, they carried their stories of Lilith and her daughters. These tales encountered local traditions already thick with night spirits and malevolent beings. What emerged was neither purely Jewish nor entirely European, but a hybrid that took root in the collective fear. The Germanic peoples knew of the mare long before they heard of Lilith. This creature came in darkness and sat upon the chests of sleepers, causing breathless terror and paralysis. Victims would wake unable to move, feeling a terrible weight pressing down, sometimes glimpsing a shadowy female form in the corner of their vision. The mare gave its name to the nightmare, a word that survives long after belief in the demon itself has faded. The connection came naturally. The mare's behavior matched exactly what Jewish folklore attributed to Lilith's daughters. Both attacked at night, both targeted the vulnerable, sleepers, children, pregnant women. Both could be warded off with specific talismans and rituals. As communities mixed, the stories merged. The mare became another face of the Lilin, another manifestation of the same ancient threat. Slavic lands had their own versions. The Mora in southern regions, the Mara in the north, the Zmora in Polish tradition. Each culture shaped the demon slightly differently, but the core remained constant. A female spirit, often appearing as a beautiful woman who transformed into something monstrous, who entered through keyholes or cracks in walls, who left victims exhausted and terrified. The British Isles contributed the figure of the hag, particularly prominent in Scottish and Irish folklore. This was an older woman, withered and powerful, who rode through the night on human victims as though they were horses. She would braid their hair, or the manes of horses in the stable, creating elf locks that brought bad fortune. To find your hair mysteriously braided in the morning was proof the hag had visited. The pattern matched Lilith's own transformation in legend, from beautiful maiden to ancient crone. Scandinavia developed perhaps the most detailed taxonomy of these night spirits. The Mara there could be a separate entity or the detached spirit of a living woman sent out during sleep to torment others. Certain women were believed to be Mara-ridden without their conscious knowledge, their spirits slipping free while they slept. This aligned with medieval Christian concepts of the witch whose soul might attend demonic Sabbaths while her body lay in bed. The physical evidence left behind became crucial to these beliefs. Victims reported similar symptoms across vast distances and cultures. Waking in the night, unable to move, a sensation of pressure on the chest, difficulty breathing, visual or auditory hallucinations, profound fear. Modern medicine recognizes this as sleep paralysis, a temporary disruption of the normal transition between sleep states. but for centuries it was proof of demonic visitation. Geographic variations added specific details. Italian folklore spoke of the strega, the witch who became an owl or moth to enter homes. She too preyed on children and sleeping adults. Romanian tradition described the moroi, female vampires who were essentially identical to succubi. Greek villages feared the gello, spirits of women who died in childbirth and returned to steal living babies. Each culture painted the same threat in local colors. The methods of warding off these creatures evolved similarly across regions. Iron provided universal protection. An iron nail above the door, scissors under the pillow, a horseshoe over the threshold. The metal's properties disrupted demonic power. Salt, another substance associated with preservation and purity, served similar purposes. Lines of salt across windows and doorways created barriers the night demons couldn't cross. Plants offered defense as well. Garlic, already known from Mediterranean and Eastern European traditions as demon repellent, spread across the continent. Mugwort, rue, vervain, and other bitter or aromatic herbs were bundled and hung in homes. The specific plants varied by region, but the principle remained. Strong scents and substances associated with life and growth could counter creatures of death and darkness. Religious symbols took on new importance in Christian Europe, where Jewish amulets invoked specific angel names to bind Lilith. Christian versions called on saints and the Virgin Mary. The sign of the cross, holy water, blessed medallions. These served the same function as older protective magic, baptized into Christian practice. The timing of attacks showed remarkable consistency. The night demons came most often during the hours between midnight and dawn. They targeted women in their monthly courses, women during or just after childbirth, and unbaptized infants. They couldn't enter a home uninvited, but might be welcomed accidentally through careless words or leaving doors ajar at the wrong hour. Folktales preserved warnings in story form. A beautiful woman appears at twilight, asking to be let in. She seems harmless, even pitiable, but those who admit her find their children sick by morning. A man dreams of a lovely maiden. She visits him nightly until he grows pale and weak, aging rapidly. A midwife is called to attend a birth in a strange house. She sees through glamour magic that the fine ladies present are actually monsters, and only her quick prayer saves the mother and child. These stories performed social functions beyond demon defense. They enforced community standards about hospitality and caution, about the dangers of solitary travel and the importance of ritual protection. They gave names to experiences that otherwise seemed random or meaningless. When an infant died of SIDS, the night hag provided an explanation. When a young person wasted away from undiagnosed illness, the succubus was blamed. The legal system occasionally acknowledged these beliefs officially. Witch trials across Europe sometimes included charges of night riding or spirit sending. Women accused of being witches were asked about their nocturnal activities, about spirits they commanded, about whether they had left their bodies at night. The assumption was that witches were not merely humans who had made pacts with demons, but might be demons themselves, daughters of the ancient line who had infiltrated human communities. Physical characteristics became markers of demonic heritage. A woman who was too beautiful or too ugly, who had unusual eyes or strange birthmarks, who remained unmarried past expected age, who never bore children, or whose children frequently died. All of these could mark her as potentially demon-touched. The traits that Jewish folklore attributed to Lilith's daughters transferred readily to European women who failed to conform. Yet the folklore preserved something else as well. Methods of resistance that empowered ordinary people. You didn't need a priest or rabbi to protect yourself from the night demons. You could gather herbs yourself. You could position iron yourself. You could speak the correct words and make the correct signs. This was magic available to everyone, a democratization of spiritual warfare that existed alongside official religious power structures. The names changed across languages and centuries. Specific rituals varied by culture and region, but the underlying pattern remained stable for thousands of years. Night demons, who were female, who attacked the vulnerable, who could be defended against through specific practices. The daughters of Lilith wore many faces across Europe, but they remained recognizably her children. The romantic reinvention. Lilith in 19th century art and literature. Something shifted in the 19th century. The demons began to transform under the gaze of poets and painters. Lilith, for millennia, the embodiment of fear and threat, became something else entirely. Beautiful, tragic, almost sympathetic. Her daughters followed this reimagining, their monstrous aspects softened into dangerous allure. The Romantic movement saw in Lilith what it valued most: rebellion, passion, and suffering. She had defied authority and paid an eternal price. She was beautiful and terrible, sensual and remote. She embodied the femme fatale long before that term was coined. For artists seeking to push against Victorian propriety while working within its constraints, Lilith offered perfect subject matter. Dante Gabriel Rossetti painted her twice, each version capturing a different facet of the myth. In Lady Lilith, she sits nude before a mirror, combing her long hair, an image of pure narcissism and sensuality. Her face shows no remorse or suffering, only serene self-absorption. Rossetti positioned her as the opposite of Mary Magdalene, another subject he painted. Where Mary turned from sin toward salvation, Lilith remains eternally committed to her own beauty and power. The poem Rossetti wrote for the painting makes her threat explicit. And still she sits, young while the earth is old, and, subtly of herself contemplative, draws men to watch the bright web she can weave, till heart and body and life are in its hold. She is no longer the child thief of folklore, but a seductress who enslaves through beauty itself. Her web catches not infants, but adult men, their hearts rather than their seed. Other pre-Raphaelite painters followed this interpretation. John Collier's Lilith shows her as the Eden serpent coiled around the tree, with a woman's torso and head. Her expression is knowing, almost amused. She doesn't appear evil so much as dangerous, like a beautiful predator. The moral judgment inherent in earlier depictions fades into aesthetic appreciation. Literature seized the figure as well. George MacDonald's novel Lilith, from 1895, creates an elaborate fantasy world where she appears as a complex character, not simply evil, but wounded and ultimately redeemable. She has become a tragic queen, her cruelty stemming from ancient hurt rather than inherent nature. This was radical reinterpretation, suggesting that the first demon might be saved. The daughters of Lilith followed their mother into this new aesthetic. Where folklore had made them child stealers and nightmare bringers, Romantic literature transformed them into vampires, sirens, and seductive phantoms. They retained danger but gained beauty and a kind of nobility. They were no longer merely threats to be warded off, but figures of dark fascination. The vampire genre owes enormous debt to this reframing. Sheridan Le Fanu's Carmilla, from 1872, presents a female vampire who is beautiful, sophisticated, and genuinely capable of love, albeit a love that consumes its object. She displays all the traits of Lilith's daughters: nocturnal habits, preying on sleeping victims, a focus on young women, and an ambiguous sexuality. But she is also lonely, seeking connection even as she destroys. This reflected changing attitudes toward femininity itself. The Victorian era maintained strict codes about women's proper behavior, yet was simultaneously obsessed with transgressive femininity. Lilith and her daughters could embody everything forbidden: sexual agency, independence, power, refusal of motherhood, pursuit of knowledge, rejection of male authority. Artists and writers projected onto these demons their own ambivalent feelings about changing gender roles. The symbolist movement pushed this further. Gustave Moreau's paintings depicted beautiful, dangerous women drawn from mythology and demonology. His Salome and similar works blurred the line between holy and demonic feminine figures. All became aesthetic objects, their moral status less important than their visual and symbolic power. Poetry adopted Lilith as a recurring figure. Algernon Charles Swinburne wrote of her as a force of nature, amoral rather than immoral. Robert Browning mentioned her in passing as the first Eve, treating this as accepted history rather than obscure folklore. The demon was becoming domesticated, brought into the parlor through art and verse. Even academic writing began treating Lilith differently. Early anthropologists and comparative religion scholars presented her not as a real demon, but as a fascinating artifact of belief systems. She became data, a subject of study rather than of fear. This intellectual distance allowed for appreciation of the myth's power without commitment to its truth. The daughters remained somewhat more frightening in this literature than their mother. While Lilith herself could be portrayed as queenly and dignified, her offspring often retained more monstrous elements. Yet even here, the shift towards sympathy was evident. Where earlier tales presented them as purely malevolent, 19th-century stories gave them motivations. They had been wronged or were seeking something, or suffered in their demonic state. Evil became complex. This reinvention had consequences beyond the artistic realm. It prepared the ground for the feminist reclamation that would come in the next century. By making Lilith sympathetic, by emphasizing her rebellion and independence, these romantic artists and writers had already begun to question the moral framework that made her a demon. If beauty and power and refusal to submit were demonic, what did that say about the values of the culture making that judgment? The sensuality couldn't be separated from the reinterpretation. Victorian culture was simultaneously prudish and obsessed with sex. It couldn't speak openly about desire, but could displace that desire onto demon figures. Lilith and her daughters became vehicles for expressing the erotic imagination in ways that would have been unacceptable if applied to human women. Paintings showed them nude or nearly so. Literature described their physical beauty in lavish detail. Their predatory sexuality became a central feature rather than a shameful secret. This was dangerous material, trafficking in ideas that the broader culture officially rejected. Yet it sold paintings and books, drew crowds to exhibitions, inspired imitations. The demons were profitable. By the century's end, Lilith occupied a strange dual position. She remained in folklore as a figure of fear, still invoked in some Jewish communities as a threat to children. But she also existed in high art, as a symbol of beauty and rebellion, stripped of her folkloric context and reframed for aesthetic consumption. These two Liliths existed simultaneously, serving different audiences and purposes. The daughters underwent a similar split. They were still nightmares in children's stories, still part of folk practices around childbirth and infant care. But they were also becoming vampires in Gothic literature, seductive ghosts in ghost stories, beautiful monsters in decadent poetry. The demon had become an archetype available for creative reinterpretation. This transformation in the 19th century set the template for all subsequent handling of Lilith and her daughters. Once the demons had been reimagined as potentially sympathetic, as beautiful rather than merely terrifying, as complex rather than simply evil, they could never return to their original form. The romantic reinvention was irreversible. The daughters in Psychoanalysis, Jung, and the archetype of anima. The 20th century brought a new way of understanding demons, not as external beings, but as projections of the human psyche. Sigmund Freud, and especially Carl Jung, developed frameworks that reinterpreted mythology and demonology as maps of internal psychological territory. Lilith and her daughters found a new home in this landscape. Jung's concept of anima provided the crucial theoretical bridge. Every man, Jung argued, carries within his unconscious a feminine component, the anima. This represents aspects of the psyche traditionally coded as feminine: emotion, intuition, connection to the unconscious, and the capacity for relationship. Anima appears in dreams and fantasies as various female figures, ranging from maternal to erotic, but anima has a shadow side. When repressed or rejected, it becomes destructive. Jung called this the terrible mother, or anima, as devourer. Here we find Lilith and her daughters perfectly positioned. They embody exactly what the terrible mother represents: the feminine that refuses to nurture, that takes instead of giving, that seduces and destroys rather than comforting and creating. The parallels run deep. Lilith's most ancient roles, child stealing, sexual predation, night terrors, match precisely what Jung described as manifestations of the negative anima. When a man fears women, when he experiences female sexuality as threatening rather than inviting, when he cannot integrate his own feminine aspects, anima appears in dreams as a demon. She is Lilith under another name. The daughters represent multiplicity of this threat. A single demon might be dismissed as an aberration, but a host of them suggests something systematic. Jung would say they represent the many ways the negative anima can manifest. Different daughters embody different aspects of the psyche's shadow feminine. Agrat as uncontrolled desire, Nama as deceptive beauty, the unnamed succubi as the fear of intimacy and vulnerability. Freud, though less mystical in his approach, provided supporting analysis through his work on sexuality and repression. The succubus legend, he might argue, stems from sexual dreams and nocturnal emissions that men couldn't acknowledge. Rather than accept their own sexual nature, especially erotic feelings toward inappropriate objects, men projected this onto external demons. The demons became repositories for desires the conscious mind found unacceptable. The timing of attacks reinforces this interpretation. Demons came at night, during sleep, when conscious control lapses. They caused dreams that were sexual, but often mixed with horror. They left physical evidence: exhaustion, sometimes emission that required explanation. The demon provided an external cause for internal experiences, protecting the ego from recognizing its own shadow contents. Jungian analysts, after Jung himself, expanded this framework considerably. Marie-Louise von Franz wrote about the devouring mother archetype, citing Lilith as a prime example. James Hillman discussed the terrible goddess present in many mythologies, connecting her to the need for ego dissolution as part of psychological growth. Lilith's demand that Adam accept her equality became, in this reading, the psyche's demand that consciousness integrate its rejected portions. The child-stealing aspect takes on new meaning in this framework. Children represent innocence, potential, new beginnings. A demon who steals children is, psychologically, an internal force that attacks new growth in the personality. When someone begins to develop in healthy directions, becoming more open, more creative, more integrated, the shadow may react with violence. Lilith, stealing the newborn, is the psyche's resistance to change, its attachment to old patterns even when they cause suffering. Dreams of being chased or attacked by beautiful women, common across cultures and time periods, became interpreted as anima encounters. The dreamer is being pursued by aspects of his own psyche that he has rejected or failed to integrate. The attack is an attempt at forced recognition. Anima will not be ignored indefinitely. If she cannot be integrated consciously, she will intrude through dreams and symptoms. Female analysts pointed out that women too could have Lilith dreams, though the dynamic differed. For women, Lilith might represent the shadow self, the angry, sexual, free parts of the personality that society, and sometimes the woman herself, found unacceptable. A woman dreaming of Lilith might be encountering her own repressed power and independence. The demon becomes the disowned, self-demanding recognition. The Jungian framework also explained the persistence of demon beliefs. Archetypes, Jung argued, are inherited patterns of thought built into human psychology. They appear across cultures because they reflect universal human experiences. The mother archetype exists because everyone has or had a mother. Anima exists because everyone, regardless of culture, must integrate multiple aspects of self. Lilith persists because the psychological tensions she represents are universal and timeless. Modern depth psychology added neuroscience to this interpretation. Sleep paralysis, the experience underlying many demonic visitation stories, results from temporary disruption in the neural mechanisms controlling the sleep-wake transition. During REM sleep, the body becomes paralyzed to prevent acting out dreams. Sometimes consciousness returns before this paralysis ends. The experience is terrifying. Awake but unable to move, often accompanied by vivid hallucinations because the REM system is still partially active. The hallucinations during sleep paralysis tend towards specific forms. A sense of presence in the room, a figure sitting on the chest, sometimes explicitly malevolent beings. Cross-cultural studies show the same patterns repeating. This suggests that the brain, when caught in this state, generates similar threat images regardless of cultural background. The specific identity of the threat, Lilith, the mare, the alien in modern abduction accounts, comes from culture, but the experience of threat itself appears hardwired. This biological basis doesn't erase the psychological interpretation, rather it deepens it. The brain has evolved to prioritize threat detection. During vulnerable states like sleep, this system remains partially active. Any ambiguous stimulus gets interpreted as potentially dangerous. The figure in the corner, the weight on the chest, these are the brain's best guess about what might be threatening the sleeping organism. Culture then shapes these raw experiences into specific forms. A medieval Christian experiencing sleep paralysis would identify the threatening presence as a demon or incubus. A modern person might interpret it as an intruder, or, if exposed to such ideas, an alien. The underlying experience remains constant. The narrative clothing changes. Therapy began incorporating these ideas. Jungian analysis sometimes involved active imagination work with demon figures appearing in dreams. Rather than trying to banish them, the analyst would encourage the patient to engage them in dialogue, to ask what they wanted, to attempt integration rather than rejection. A patient dreaming repeatedly of being attacked by a female demon might be guided to speak with her in imagination, to understand what aspect of himself she represented. Critics of psychoanalytic interpretation pointed out the risks of reducing all mythology to psychology. Just because a psychological interpretation is possible doesn't mean it exhausts the meaning of a myth. Lilith existed as a figure in actual religious practice, with real social consequences for thousands of years before anyone thought to interpret her as anima projection. The psychological reading is one layer, not the entirety. Yet the impact of Jung's framework proved enormous. It provided a way to take demons seriously without believing in them, literally. It preserved the power of the myths while making them acceptable to modern secular sensibility. Lilith could matter even if she wasn't real. Her daughters could threaten even if they were aspects of ourselves rather than external entities. The feminist reclamation, from demon to icon of independence. The 20th century witnessed a dramatic reversal. The demon became a hero. Lilith, for thousands of years a figure of fear and condemnation, transformed into a symbol of female power and independence. Her daughters followed this path, reimagined as women who refused to submit to patriarchal control rather than monsters who threatened human children. The groundwork had been laid in the 19th century, but the full reclamation began in the 1960s and 1970s alongside second-wave feminism. Scholars and activists rediscovered the alphabet of Ben Sira, noting its crucial detail. Lilith was created equal to Adam, from the same earth. She wasn't made from his rib, not created as his helpmate, but as his partner. Her rebellion wasn't against God, but against a system that demanded her subordination. This reading transformed everything. Lilith's refusal to lie beneath Adam during intercourse became not perverted sexuality, but insistence on equality. Her speaking of God's name wasn't blasphemy, but claiming power that was rightfully hers. Her flight from Eden wasn't cowardice, but the strength to choose freedom over comfortable slavery. She became the first woman to say no to patriarchy and pay the price for that refusal. The demonization of Lilith made perfect sense in this framework. Patriarchal religious systems, the argument went, couldn't allow her story to be told positively. A woman who refused male authority, who claimed equality, who preferred freedom to security, such a figure threatened the entire social order. Making her a demon served to warn women against following her example. The message was clear. If you refuse to submit, you will be cast out and transformed into a monster. Jewish feminists led much of this reclamation work. Judith Plasko's influential essay, The Coming of Lilith, reimagined the first woman as a role model. Aviva Kantor-Zukoff wrote about Lilith as the first independent woman. The magazine Lilith, founded in 1976, explicitly took the name to represent Jewish feminist voices, challenging traditional interpretations. They reclaimed the demon as their ancestor. The daughters of Lilith benefited from this reinterpretation. If Lilith herself had been slandered by patriarchy, her daughters were women throughout history who had refused to conform. Every woman accused of witchcraft, every woman who remained unmarried, every woman who pursued knowledge or power or sexual freedom outside control, these were Lilith's true daughters, not demonic spawn but rebels against an unjust system. This framework reinterpreted the accusations themselves. When folklore claimed Lilith stole children, was this not projection of male fear that women might prioritize themselves over motherhood? When she was accused of seducing men, was this not simply blaming women for male desire that couldn't be controlled? The child stealing became refusal of compulsory motherhood. The seduction became ownership of one's own sexuality. Academic feminist theology developed sophisticated versions of these arguments. Scholars like Raphael Patai documented Lilith's origins and evolution, showing how the myth changed to serve different social needs. Others compared Lilith to other suppressed goddess figures, arguing for an ancient tradition of powerful female divinity that patriarchal monotheism had systematically demonized. The political implications were explicit. If patriarchy could take a figure like Lilith, created equal, demanding justice, and transform her into a demon, what did this reveal about how power operates? It showed that the system maintained itself not just through force, but through narrative. By controlling which stories were told and how they were interpreted, patriarchy shaped reality itself. Reclaiming Lilith was thus a political act, a taking back of narrative power. Writers and artists joined this movement enthusiastically. Anita Diamant's novel, The Red Tent, featured Lilith as a wise woman wronged by history. Novels, poems, plays, and visual art reimagined the first woman as strong rather than evil, choosing freedom rather than being cast out. Where romantic art had made her beautiful, feminist art made her righteous. The Jewish feminist Seder, an alternative to traditional Passover celebrations, sometimes included a Lilith's cup alongside the traditional Elijah's cup. This represented the female prophet, the woman's voice excluded from traditional ritual. Though Lilith wasn't herself a prophet, she symbolized all women written out of religious history, demonized or erased rather than honored. Not everyone within feminism embraced this reclamation uncritically. Some pointed out the danger of identifying with a figure whose primary mythology involved harming children. Even as metaphor, they argued, this was problematic. Others noted that Lilith's story was fundamentally about a privileged position. She was Adam's equal, after all, while Eve was created subordinate. What about the Eves of the world who started from inequality? Did they matter less than the Liliths who refused to accept it? There were also concerns about cultural appropriation. Lilith was a figure from Jewish tradition, yet she was being adopted by Gentile feminists who sometimes stripped away that context. The demon became a universal symbol of female resistance, but in doing so lost her specific cultural and religious meanings. Some Jewish feminists appreciated the broader adoption. Others found it troubling. The reclamation also had to grapple with Lilith's genuine darkness. She wasn't merely misunderstood in the folklore. She was portrayed as genuinely harmful. The stories described her choking infants, causing miscarriages, destroying marriages. Could this simply be dismissed as patriarchal slander? Or did the tradition preserve something more complex, a recognition that female power, like any power, could be destructive as well as creative? Some feminist interpretations found value in that darkness. Yes, Lilith was dangerous, but women's anger is justified. Women forced into subordinate roles have reason to rage. The demon could represent righteous fury at injustice. Her violence wasn't evil, but revolutionary, the destruction necessary before new creation could begin. The daughters, in this revolutionary reading, were every woman who resisted, the woman who refused marriage and faced accusations of witchcraft, the midwife whose knowledge threatened male doctors, the woman whose beauty and independence marked her as dangerous, the lesbian whose sexuality existed outside male approval, the woman who pursued education or career over motherhood. All of these were daughters of Lilith, carrying forward her refusal to submit. Popular culture absorbed these ideas rapidly. Young women began naming themselves or their daughters Lilith, reclaiming the name from demonic to empowering. Feminist bookstores and spiritual centers used Lilith imagery. Bands, products, and organizations adopted the name, trading on its associations with strength and independence. The Internet age accelerated this spread. Websites, forums, and social media amplified the feminist interpretation. Memes portrayed Lilith as the first woman who stood up for herself. Blog posts explained her story as the real reason she was demonized. The narrative became simplified, but also more widely distributed than ever before. Yet complexity remained beneath the surface. Academic feminist scholars continued to wrestle with Lilith's multivalent meanings. She could be both victim and victimizer, both wronged and dangerous, both justified in her anger and responsible for her choices. The mythology resisted simple appropriation because it was ancient and layered, shaped by thousands of years and multiple cultures. The reclamation of Lilith represents one of feminism's most striking reinterpretations of traditional material. A figure explicitly labeled evil and demonic became a hero and role model. Her daughters, the nightmares of folklore, became a metaphorical sisterhood of resistance. Whether this interpretation captures the truth of Lilith or creates a new myth of its own remains debated, but its power to inspire and challenge is undeniable. The pop culture sisterhood. Lilith's daughters in film, TV, and games. Modern entertainment media discovered what folklore had always known. Demons make compelling characters. As film, television, and video games became dominant storytelling forms in the late 20th and early 21st centuries, Lilith and her daughters proliferated across screens and pixels. They evolved to match each medium's demands while retaining their essential qualities. Television found Lilith particularly useful. The medium's need for recurring characters and season-long arcs suited demon mythology perfectly. In Supernatural, Lilith appears as one of the series' major antagonists, a powerful demon working to break the seals that bind Lucifer. She assumes various forms, sometimes taking the shape of a young girl, which reveals the stark contrast between an appearance of innocence and a nature that is monstrous. In the series, Lilith leads entire legions of demons, which explicitly establishes her as a maternal figure to the armies of hell. True Blood chose a different route, linking Lilith to the mythology of vampires. In this interpretation, she becomes not the mother of demons, but rather the very first vampire, created by God either as punishment or possibly as some kind of test. The mythology presented by the show makes every vampire her child in a very literal way, which extends the concept of Lilith's daughters to encompass an entire species. Characters in the show worship her, live in fear of her, truly fear her, and in the end must face her directly when she awakens from centuries of ancient sleep. The sitcom Frasier presented an unexpected version of Lilith, not a demon whatsoever, but a character called Lilith Sternin, who is Frasier's intellectually cold ex-wife. Though the character is used for comedic purposes, she embodies many of the traditional traits associated with Lilith, including dominance, sharp intelligence, emotional remoteness, and a certain predatory approach to relationships. She regularly undermines Frasier's masculinity through her intellectual and emotional superiority. The choice of her name was intentional, deliberately drawing on the associations connected to the demon. Video games took to Lilith with great enthusiasm. In the Diablo series, Lilith appears as the daughter of Mephisto and the mother of the Nephilim, which is a race of beings created from the union between angels and demons. Diablo IV makes her the primary antagonist, depicting her with a degree of detail and complexity that the franchise had never seen before. Her motivation centers on protecting her children, even if doing so means the destruction of humanity. The game portrays her as being both monstrous and sympathetic at the same time. Darkstalkers, which is a fighting game series, includes Morrigan and Lilith as playable characters, who are explicitly presented as connected succubi, complete with bat wings and revealing clothing. They represent the archetype of the sexualized demon woman, while being portrayed as protagonists instead of villains. The games rely heavily on succubus mythology, while placing it within a world where demons, humans, and other supernatural beings all coexist and come into conflict. The Borderlands series includes multiple characters who bear the name Lilith, with the most prominent being the Siren-class character featured in Borderlands 2. She possesses magical powers, displays a rebellious attitude, and takes on a leadership role. While she is not explicitly demonic, she carries forward those associations of power, independence, and danger. Film has approached this more subtly, yet no less pervasively. The demon woman, who both seduces and destroys, makes appearances in countless horror films, though she does not always go by the name Lilith. Jennifer's body presents a teenage girl who becomes possessed by a demon and then begins seducing and killing her male classmates, creating a modern succubus narrative complete with sexual threat and body horror. The entity dramatizes the horror of sleep paralysis and sexual assault by invisible forces, connecting directly to the incubus and succubus tradition. Anime and manga showcase countless variations on these themes. Neon Genesis Evangelion features Lilith as one of the primordial beings whose awakening poses a threat to all of humanity. High School DxD and similar series depict Lilith as the mother of all succubi and a significant figure within demon society. These interpretations pull from Western demonology, but run it through the filter of Japanese storytelling conventions and aesthetic sensibilities. Comic books have developed their own versions as well. Lucifer, written by Mike Carey, features a Lilith who serves as the mother of Mazikeen, which is a race of demons. She is ancient, immensely powerful, and acts according to her own inscrutable purposes. Marvel Comics has utilized multiple characters named Lilith, including one who claims the title of Mother of All Demons, and another who connects to Dracula's mythology. Young adult literature discovered Lilith during the urban fantasy boom. Characters who are descended from Lilith, who serve Lilith, or who are possessed by fragments of Lilith, make appearances in dozens of different series. These books frequently soften the demon's danger while maintaining her rebellion and power. She transforms into a dark patron for teenage girls who are navigating the very same struggles with authority and identity that Lilith herself faced in Eden. The vampire romance genre owes an indirect yet substantial debt to Lilith mythology, with the sexy, dangerous, nocturnal predator who forms forbidden relationships with mortal beings. This amounts to a succubus under a different name, whether it is Twilight, The Vampire Diaries, or countless other series. The fundamental template comes from the same source material that originally gave us Lilith's daughters. Role-playing games, both the tabletop variety and digital versions, have codified many of these interpretations directly into game mechanics. Dungeons and Dragons has included Lilith-inspired demons and devils from its earliest editions. Succubi show up as official monster types with particular stat blocks and behaviors drawn straight from the folklore. Players have the option to summon them, battle them, or in certain games, even play as them. World of Darkness and similar games featuring modern occult settings place Lilith's children in a central position. The Vampire. The masquerade setting features the Bahari, which is a bloodline that worships Lilith as the Dark Mother. Demon. The Fallen presents Lilith as a powerful being connected directly to the fall of the angels. These games actively encourage players to explore the moral complexity inherent in demon characters. Streaming content has rapidly accelerated the multiplication of characters inspired by Lilith. Chilling Adventures of Sabrina features Lilith as a major character under the name Madame Satan, actively working to claim the throne as Queen of Hell. She displays ambition, possesses great power, and ultimately proves sympathetic despite her demonic nature. The show makes explicit references to the alphabet of Ben Sira, presenting Lilith's story as historical fact within its fictional universe. American Gods includes Lilith as one of the old gods who are struggling to maintain relevance in contemporary America. Her appearance is brief, yet her presence serves to acknowledge the enduring power of the myth. Both the novel and the series treat mythology as being literally real, with gods and demons sustained by ongoing human belief. Lilith persists because people continue to tell her story. Animation created for adult audiences has also embraced the demon-woman archetype. Castlevania features succubi and demon queens drawn directly from the folklore tradition. Helluva Boss, and Has-Been Hotel populate hell with an entire society of demons, many of whom display traits associated with Lilith's daughters. These shows combine horror with dark comedy, rendering demons both threatening and relatable simultaneously. The aesthetic representation of Lilith's daughters has become standardized across various media. Dark hair or unnaturally bright-colored hair, pale skin, revealing clothing designed to emphasize sexuality. Frequently wings, which might be bat wings, feathered wings or abstract energy wings, claws or exceptionally long nails, eyes that glow or appear inhuman in some way. The specific details shift, but the overall impression stays consistent. Beautiful, dangerous, otherworldly. This visual language draws from centuries of artistic representation filtered through contemporary sensibilities. The pre-Raphaelite paintings, the Romantic poetry, the medieval woodcuts, the ancient amulets, all of these contribute to how modern media visualizes these characters. Each new iteration references those that came before, constructing a palimpsest of demonic imagery. The proliferation across media has made Lilith and her daughters more familiar to contemporary audiences than at any previous point in history. A person who has never encountered the alphabet of Ben Sira or seen a protective amulet might still recognize the name Lilith from a dozen different shows, games, or books. The demon has achieved mainstream recognition, yet this familiarity arrives with a certain dilution. The figure becomes malleable, adapted to serve whatever story requires telling. She can function as villain or hero, monster or misunderstood victim, ancient evil or modern rebel. The specific cultural and religious context gradually fades, while the archetypal elements continue to persist. Lilith transforms into a template rather than belonging to a particular tradition. The daughters especially have evolved into a category more than distinct individuals. The phrase Lilith's daughter in popular culture can indicate any beautiful, dangerous, demon woman character. The term operates as shorthand for a particular set of traits and narrative possibilities. Writers and game designers can invoke the category without needing to engage with the deeper mythology. This development represents both loss and transformation. The rich complexity of the original traditions becomes simplified for purposes of mass consumption. However, that simplification also guarantees survival. Myths that are preserved only in academic texts and religious communities will eventually fade from living culture. Myths that make appearances in television shows and video games remain vital, even when changed. The daughters of Lilith have therefore achieved a form of immortality through popular culture. They manifest in new forms every year, adapted to suit new media and evolving audience expectations. They remain recognizably themselves, nocturnal, beautiful, dangerous, independent, while continuously reinventing the specific details. The children of the first demon continue to thrive in the 21st century. The Lilith in all of us, a modern metaphor for shadow selves. Beyond the realms of history and folklore, beyond psychology and feminism, the myth of Lilith and her daughters speaks to something much more immediate. Every person carries within themselves aspects they cannot fully accept or successfully integrate. These shadow portions of the self, the parts we deny, push away, or find shameful, discover expression through demon mythology. Consider what Lilith represents at her very core. The parts of ourselves that we exile. She started as Adam's equal, but faced expulsion when she insisted on maintaining that equality. She transformed into a demon, not because of inherent evil, but through her refusal to conform. Her transformation points toward a universal process. When we prove unable to accept aspects of ourselves, we project them outward and assign them monstrous labels. Everyone carries a personal Lilith within themselves. traits or desires that seem incompatible with their self-image. For some people, it manifests as anger that seems too intense to openly acknowledge. For others, it takes the form of sexual desires that contradict how they wish to be perceived, ambition that feels immodest, selfishness that violates cherished beliefs about being a good person. These aspects refuse to disappear when rejected. They retreat underground, surfacing in dreams, in sudden outbursts, in patterns we cannot quite seem to control. The daughters multiply this fragmentation exponentially. Where Lilith represents the original exile, her daughters embody the proliferation of denied aspects over the passage of time. Each quality we reject, each impulse we cannot successfully integrate, transforms into another demon child. The internal world gradually fills with these orphaned parts, each one carrying a portion of our vitality and energy, each one existing in opposition to conscious intention. Modern therapy acknowledges this process using different terminology. Internal family systems speaks of parts that become split off from the core self. Object relations theory discusses how aspects of the psyche become separated and projected onto other people. Trauma therapy addresses how unbearable experiences create fragments of self that cannot be integrated. The language varies, but all describe the same fundamental phenomenon that the Lilith myth dramatized thousands of years ago. The nocturnal nature of Lilith's attacks maps perfectly onto this understanding. Demons arrived at night because that is precisely when conscious control falls asleep. The shadow material emerges in dreams, in that liminal space between sleep and waking, during moments when the ego's vigilance temporarily lapses. We encounter our denied selves when we can no longer maintain the fiction that we consist only of the acceptable, integrated portions we publicly claim. The sexual nature of many Lilith legends points directly toward a specific area of shadow. Sexuality remains for many people the part of themselves most difficult to integrate successfully. Desires that contradict religious teachings. Attractions that challenge established identity. Fantasies that seem shameful. These become internal demons. They visit during the night in dreams and fantasies because the conscious daylight self cannot acknowledge them. The child-stealing aspect touches on another profound fear. We harbor worry about the vulnerability of new beginnings, new growth, new possibilities. The internal critic that attacks nascent creativity, the voice insisting that new relationships will certainly fail. The anxiety that systematically undermines each attempt at meaningful change. These represent Lilith strangling the newborn. The demon embodies the part of ourselves that cannot tolerate growth because growth demands change, and change poses a threat to existing structures. Yet the myth also extends hope through its persistence. Lilith suffered expulsion but was never destroyed. She remained real, influential, demanding acknowledgement even during her exile. This suggests that shadow material cannot be eliminated, only related to in different ways. The demons refuse to vanish when banished. They wait in the desert, at the edges, prepared to return. Modern integration of the shadow begins with recognition rather than rejection. Instead of fighting to keep the demons outside, this approach suggests inviting them inside, learning what messages they carry. The anger that seemed too intense might contain important information about violated boundaries. The sexual desire that seemed shameful might point toward genuine needs. The selfishness that felt wrong might indicate where too much has been sacrificed. This does not mean acting on every impulse or completely abandoning moral standards. Integration is not about allowing the shadow to run wild without restraint. It concerns acknowledging what exists within us without harsh judgment, learning from it, discovering ways to honor its truth while maintaining conscious choice. Lilith can be welcomed back to Eden without resulting chaos, but only if her reality receives acknowledgement rather than denial. The practice appears different for each individual person. For someone taught that anger is completely unacceptable, integration might mean learning to feel and appropriately express anger. For someone who learned that sexuality is inherently dirty, it might mean developing a healthy relationship with desire. For someone terrified of their own ambition, it might mean pursuing goals without constant apologizing. The daughters of Lilith within this framework represent the many diverse ways shadow material manifests itself. There exists not one demon, but many, because there exists not one rejected aspect, but countless ones. Each person's internal mythology populates itself differently. Some individuals struggle most intensely with rage, others grapple primarily with desire. Still others wrestle with vulnerability or need. The specific demons vary widely, but the underlying pattern of rejection and exile remains constant. Cultural shadow follows this identical pattern. Societies collectively reject certain qualities and project them onto marginalized groups. Women who refuse traditional roles transform into witches, demons, dangers to the social order. Men who fail to conform to masculine ideals face similar processes of demonization. Any quality the dominant culture cannot integrate becomes monstrous, attributed to outsiders and enemies. The history of Lilith demonstrates this clearly. As a figure created and sustained largely by patriarchal religious traditions, she embodied what those traditions most feared in women: independence, sexual autonomy, refusal of motherhood, claims to equality. By rendering these qualities demonic, the culture warned women away from them and warned men away from accepting them. The demons served the purpose of social control. However, recognition of this process creates genuine opportunity for change. Once we perceive that demons are projections rather than external realities, we can choose to reclaim what was exiled. This represents the work of both individual therapy and social justice, bringing back into relationship the parts that suffered expulsion, integrating what was rejected, making whole what became fragmented. The protective rituals directed against Lilith and her daughters can be reinterpreted as establishing boundaries rather than enacting banishment. We need not admit every shadow impulse into immediate action. Discernment continues to matter, but the goal shifts from keeping demons outside to developing conscious relationship with them. The amulets transform into reminders of self-awareness. The spells become practices of integration. Dreams of being chased by demon women, viewed in this light, represent the psyche's attempt at communication. The shadow seeks recognition. The cast-out parts seek return. The demons chase us because we continue running from them. What if instead we turn to face them directly, to ask what they need, to understand what their presence truly means? This represents frightening work. The shadow material was rejected for reasons. It felt too overwhelming, too wrong, too dangerous. Facing it requires genuine courage and frequently requires support. The modern equivalent of the protective angels might be therapists, wise friends, communities that can hold us steady as we undertake this work. Yet the alternative amounts to continued warfare with ourselves. The demons do not cease to exist simply because we fight them. They grow stronger during exile, becoming more monstrous the longer they remain unacknowledged. Lilith and her daughters multiply in the darkness, fed by our ongoing refusal to see them. The only way to diminish their destructive power is to bring them into the light of consciousness. The metaphor extends to humanity as a whole. We carry collective shadows representing the disowned aspects of our species. Violence we commit but refuse to acknowledge. Cruelty we benefit from but will not claim. Desires and fears so fundamental that only mythology can successfully express them. Lilith and her daughters form part of this collective shadow, embodying qualities human culture has struggled with since its very beginning. The enduring power of the myth resides here, in its ability to speak to this universal human experience. Whether we believe in demons literally or not, we all know intimately the experience of being haunted by rejected aspects of ourselves. We all feel the night visits of what we cannot integrate. We all struggle with the children of our own internal Lilith. The archaeological evidence, incantation bowls, and amulets. The myths were not merely stories. They shaped how people lived, how they protected themselves, how they understood misfortune. The material evidence of this belief survives in museums and private collections, testifying to the reality of Lilith and her daughters in the minds of countless generations. Incantation bowls provide the most dramatic proof. These ceramic bowls, produced throughout Mesopotamia and Persia from roughly the 3rd to 8th centuries of the Common Era, were inscribed with magical texts in Aramaic, Hebrew, Mandaic, or other languages. Thousands have been discovered, many remaining intact, buried beneath thresholds or in corners of homes. The bowls served a specific purpose: the binding of demons. The text spirals inward from the rim toward the center, creating a visual trap. Demons, it was believed, would become caught in the spiral, unable to escape, contained within the ceramic prison. Many specifically name Lilith and her children as targets. The texts command them to leave the household alone, to cease their predation, to remain bound within the ceramic prison. A typical example, translated from Aramaic, reads, "Bound and sealed are all the evil Liliths, male and female, that they may not harm or injure or do evil to X, son of Y, and to his wife, and to their sons and daughters." The specificity proves remarkable. Real names appear in these texts. The bowls were commissioned for particular families, protecting particular individuals from particular threats. The physical placement of the bowls mattered enormously. Buried beneath the threshold, they would catch demons attempting to enter the home. Positioned beneath the bed, they protected sleepers from nocturnal attack. Multiple bowls might be buried throughout a house, creating a protective grid. Archaeological excavations of ancient homes sometimes discover bowls still in their original place, marking the spots residents considered most vulnerable. The artwork on the bowls adds another significant layer of meaning. Some depict demons visually as twisted figures with wild hair, sometimes shown bound or defeated. Others show the protective angels or spirits invoked in the text. Still others employ abstract symbols and designs that carried magical significance. The bowls were functional objects, but also religious art, with the craftsmanship varying from crude to elegant. Jewish amulets provide complementary evidence across a wider geographical range. From medieval Europe to modern Yemen, Jewish communities produced protective charms against Lilith. These took many different forms: parchment scrolls, metal plaques, carved gemstones, woven bands. All shared the same purpose: keeping Lilith and her daughters away from vulnerable individuals, especially pregnant women and infants. The texts on these amulets often invoke the three angels from the alphabet of Ben Sira, Sanoi, Sansanoi, and Samangelof. According to legend, these angels were sent to bring Lilith back to Eden. They found her by the Red Sea and threatened to drown 100 of her demon children daily if she refused to return. She refused, but agreed to a compact. Wherever she saw the names of these three angels, she would not harm the child present. Amulets exploited this compact directly. By inscribing the angel names, they invoked Lilith's own promise. Many also included additional protective formulas, verses drawn from Psalms, names of God, geometric designs considered powerful. Some were quite elaborate, filling both sides of a metal plaque with tiny Hebrew script and intricate artwork. Specific amulets targeted specific dangers. For pregnant women, texts focused on preventing miscarriage and ensuring safe delivery. For newborns, the emphasis was placed on the first days and weeks of life, the most dangerous period. For adults, especially men, the amulets protected against nocturnal visitation and sexual predation. Each danger required slightly different language and invocation. The production and use of these amulets was not limited to the superstitious or uneducated. Rabbinic authorities approved their use. Texts on proper creation and consecration of protective amulets appear in serious Kabbalistic works. The practice was mainstream Judaism for centuries, only declining in relatively recent times as modernization and skepticism spread. Christian versions also exist, though they are less numerous. Medieval Europe produced amulets and prayers against incubi and succubi. These often invoked Mary and various saints rather than the three angels. The Virgin's protection specifically countered the sexual threat, her purity standing against the demon's corruption. Saint Margaret was particularly popular for protecting women in childbirth, explicitly defending against the dangers Lilith represented. Physical architecture sometimes incorporated protective elements. Certain building designs included features meant to confuse or block demons. Deliberate irregularities in construction. A window placed slightly off-center. A door not quite level. These might disrupt demonic geometry. Red paint on doors and window frames served protective purposes in many traditions, the color associated with life and therefore repelling death demons. The sheer quantity of these protective objects is staggering. Museums hold thousands of incantation bowls and amulets. Private collections contain many more. For every object that survived and reached a collection, dozens or hundreds likely existed and were lost. The archaeological record represents only a fraction of what was produced. This material evidence proves that belief in Lilith and her daughters was not abstract theology or poetic metaphor. Real people spent real money commissioning protective objects. Craftsmen specialized in creating them. Texts provided instruction on proper use. Families passed amulets down through generations, treasured as critical protections. The geographical spread of these objects is equally revealing. From Babylon to Yemen, from Egypt to Eastern Europe, from North Africa to Persia, wherever Jewish communities existed, protective magic against Lilith appears. Christian, Islamic, and other traditions in these regions show similar concerns, sometimes adopting Jewish practices directly. Dating the objects provides chronological depth. The incantation bowls span roughly 5 centuries in their main period of production. Amulets appear from late antiquity through to the modern era. The tradition shows continuity across more than 1,500 years. The same names, the same formulas, the same basic understanding of the threat persist across this vast time span. Laboratory analysis of the bowls reveals manufacturing techniques. Many were produced by specialists, suggesting an industry built around protective magic. The clay used, the firing methods, the application of text, all show professional craftsmanship. This was not folk magic, created by each family individually, but a service provided by practitioners who knew the correct procedures. The texts themselves preserve linguistic evidence. They show how Aramaic, Hebrew, and other languages were used in magical contexts. Scholars studying the evolution of these languages use incantation bowls and amulets as source material. The objects are historical documents, not just artifacts of belief. Wear patterns on surviving amulets tell stories of use. Some show clear signs of being worn constantly, the metal or parchment rubbed smooth. Others appear barely handled, perhaps kept in a specific location rather than carried. Some were deliberately destroyed, broken when they were believed to have captured a demon, or when their protective power was thought to be exhausted. Excavations occasionally find caches of protective objects together. A room might contain multiple bowls, perhaps indicating a place where magical work was performed. A grave might include amulets buried with the deceased, protecting them in death as they had in life. These contexts help archaeologists understand how the objects fit into daily life and ritual practice. Modern scientific understanding does not diminish the historical significance of these objects. They were not effective in the way intended because demons do not exist as external entities. But they were meaningful because people believed in demons and found comfort and a sense of protection in these objects. The bowls and amulets represented real responses to real fears about real experiences. Infant mortality, difficult childbirth, sleep disturbances, sexual anxiety. The craftsmanship and care evident in these objects speaks to human creativity under pressure. Faced with dangers they could not otherwise control, people created beauty. The bowls are often elegantly inscribed. The amulets show artistic skill. Protection became an occasion for art, for careful work, for objects that please the eye while serving practical purposes. Collections of these objects exist in major museums worldwide. The British Museum, the Louvre, the Israel Museum, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, all hold examples. Scholars continue to study them, publish translations and analyses, debate fine points of interpretation. The objects remain active subjects of research, not merely curiosities. For contemporary people, seeing these objects creates a direct connection to the past. Standing before an incantation bowl inscribed with Lilith's name, one confronts the reality of belief. This was not theoretical demonology, but applied protection. Someone commissioned this bowl. A craftsman inscribed it. A family buried it beneath their home, trusting it to guard them through the darkness. The enduring children. Why the myth will not die. Lilith and her daughters have survived every attempt to dismiss them. Rational explanation has not killed the myth. Scientific understanding of infant mortality and sleep paralysis has not made them irrelevant. Feminism has reinterpreted them. Psychology has explained them. Modernity has dismissed them. Yet they persist. The endurance of the myth demands explanation. Part of the answer lies in what they represent. The daughters of Lilith embody fears that remain despite changing times. Infant mortality has declined dramatically in the developed world, yet parents still fear for their newborns. SIDS happens rarely, but its randomness terrifies. The medical explanations exist, but they cannot prevent the loss or ease the grief. A demon to blame, perversely, provided more comfort than random chance. At least demons could be fought with ritual and protective magic. Sexual anxiety likewise continues. The succubus myth spoke to deep ambivalence about desire, its power, its potential to overwhelm rational control, the shame many cultures attach to it. Modern sex-positive attitudes have not eliminated these tensions. People still struggle with desire that conflicts with identity or values. The experience of sexual dreams, of arousal that seems separate from conscious will, of feeling overwhelmed by attraction, these remain universal. The fear of female power and independence that Lilith originally represented has not vanished either. Progress toward gender equality exists, but resistance persists. Women who refuse traditional roles still face condemnation in many contexts. The angry woman, the sexually autonomous woman, the woman who prioritizes herself over others. These figures still make many people uncomfortable. Lilith provides a template for that discomfort, a way of expressing it. The psychological dimension ensures continued relevance. Everyone has shadow aspects, rejected parts of self that require integration. The specific content varies by culture and individual, but the pattern holds. As long as humans have psyches that can become fragmented, the Lilith myth will speak to that reality. The demons become more sophisticated as our understanding grows, but they remain recognizable. The artistic power of the myth cannot be overlooked. Lilith is simply a compelling character. The first wife, created equal, who demanded recognition and was cast out for it. The beautiful woman who became a monster through standing up for herself. The mother of an entire race of dark children. These are strong narrative elements that inspire creative work. Artists and writers return to the myth because it offers rich material. The ambiguity helps as well. Lilith is not simply evil or simply good. She can be interpreted multiple ways depending on perspective and need. This flexibility allows the myth to serve different purposes for different people. Feminists reclaim her as a hero. Horror writers use her as a villain. Psychologists see her as an archetype. Religious believers consider her a real danger. The same figure accommodates all these readings. Pop culture has given Lilith a kind of immortality. Each generation encounters her through contemporary media rather than ancient texts. Young people today know Lilith from television shows, video games, and young adult novels before, if ever, they encounter the alphabet of Ben Sira. This ongoing cultural presence ensures she cannot be forgotten, even as specific details of the original myths fade. The intersection with feminism created a positive feedback loop. As Lilith was reclaimed as a symbol of female power, she became more visible and discussed. This increased visibility led to more feminist engagement, more artistic exploration, more scholarly attention. The demon became an industry unto herself, studied in women's studies courses, featured in feminist publications, celebrated in artwork and literature. The religious dimension persists as well. In some Orthodox Jewish communities, the old protections against Lilith continue. Amulets are still commissioned, though less commonly. Prayers for protection during childbirth may invoke the three angels. The tradition maintains itself, passed from generation to generation. Despite modernity's skepticism, New Age spirituality has adopted Lilith enthusiastically. She appears in goddess spirituality, in eclectic pagan practices, in modern witchcraft. Stripped of her specifically Jewish context, she becomes a universal divine feminine figure, often merged with other goddess traditions. This adoption ensures her presence in contemporary religious seeking, even if the details are transformed. The academic study of Lilith shows no signs of declining. Scholars continue to produce books, articles, and dissertations examining various aspects of the myth. Feminist theologians, historians of religion, anthropologists, psychologists, literary critics, all find material worth exploring. The demon generates ongoing scholarly conversation, which in turn keeps her in public discourse. The metaphorical richness of Lilith and her daughters allows almost infinite reinterpretation. Each generation can find new meanings in the old story. The myth functions as a mirror, reflecting back whatever concerns most press upon the present moment. It is sufficiently complex and multifaceted to bear this weight, never exhausting its interpretive possibilities. The fears the myth addresses are also perennial. Human vulnerability, especially infant vulnerability, remains real. Sexual anxiety persists despite changing mores. Gender relations continue to evolve and create tension. The shadow self requires ongoing work to integrate. These permanent features of human existence ensure the myth remains relevant. Technology has not eliminated these concerns, but sometimes intensifies them. Social media creates new arenas for sexual anxiety and gender conflict. Medical advances increase expectations around infant survival, making deaths feel even more tragic. Modern life produces its own forms of psychological fragmentation, requiring integration. Lilith adapts to each new context. The myth's darkness is part of its appeal. Sanitized stories lose power. Lilith remains dangerous, transgressive, uncomfortable. She cannot be fully domesticated or made safe. This edge of genuine threat, whether interpreted as real danger or psychological shadow, keeps the myth vital. Safe stories are forgettable. Lilith is not safe. The community of interest around Lilith sustains itself. People who find the myth meaningful connect with each other, share interpretations, create new expressions of the story. Online forums, social media groups, conferences, and publications provide spaces where the Lilith tradition lives and grows. The myth becomes participatory, not just received wisdom, but ongoing creation. The fact that Lilith appears in Scripture, however ambiguously, however briefly, gives the myth an anchor point that prevents it from floating free into pure fantasy. That single verse in Isaiah provides just enough biblical legitimacy to make the demon feel historically grounded, even while the full mythology developed outside canonical texts. The suffering and injustice in the world also sustain these myths. When bad things happen without clear cause, demons provide explanation. When systems feel oppressive, demon imagery helps articulate that oppression. When personal pain cannot be expressed directly, metaphor and myth offer outlets. Lilith and her daughters serve these functions as mythology has always done. The endurance of the myth ultimately testifies to its truth. Not factual truth about external demons, but truth about human experience and human nature. We are creatures who exile parts of ourselves and then suffer from that exile. We are creatures who fear the feminine, who struggle with sexuality, who cannot bear the randomness of infant death. We are creatures who create mythology to hold these tensions, to make them bearable through narrative. Lilith will continue as long as these tensions exist. Her daughters will multiply as long as human psychology produces shadow. The myth has survived Babylonian civilization, the Roman Empire, medieval Christianity, Enlightenment rationalism, and postmodern skepticism. It will likely survive whatever comes next, adapting as always to speak to the eternal human condition beneath whatever temporary forms culture takes. The enduring children are not just the demon spawn of folklore, they are the stories themselves, passed generation to generation, never quite the same, but always recognizable. They are the interpretations multiplying like the Lilin themselves, each giving birth to new understandings. They are the fears and hopes and questions that make us human, given form in ancient names that refuse to be forgotten.